Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to declare open the second plenary session of the 7th Conference of State Parties. Delegates, we recall that yesterday we experienced a time overrun in our work, as a result of which we could not go beyond agenda item number 4. The plan has been to move on to agenda item number 5, but we couldn't. And regrettably also, we could not exhaust the published speakers list. Though the agenda item 4 closed yesterday, I will now endeavor to afford the speakers on the closed speakers list for agenda item number 4 an opportunity during the course of the week to deliver their brief interventions when we find time. The affected delegations are as follows. United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, you know. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Control Arms, MAT for Peace, Development and Human Rights, Honduras, Nigeria, ASER, and Cameroon. Those are the speakers on my list who we didn't have the chance to make their interventions yesterday, and for whom we'll find time in the course of the week to get them to make their points. I will give the affected delegations sufficient notice regarding the time when they can deliver their statements. In advance of that occasion, I request the affected delegations to summarize their statements and have their full statements submitted to the Secretariat for publication on the ATT's website. I think that's very important. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, today we will focus on 3 agenda items. 5, treaty universalization. Number 6, treaty implementation. And agenda number 7, matters pertaining to the Secretariat. So we move now to agenda number 5, item 5, treaty universalization. With respect to this agenda, we shall commence this section with the ATT Secretariat's brief overview presentation on the status of ATT participation since the treaty came into force in 2014. After the Secretariat's presentation, I will invite my co-chair of the Working Group on Treaty Implementation, Ambassador Villegas of Argentina, to join me in presenting to the conference the report of the Working Group. This will be followed by the delegates' exchange of views on the report and other matters related to treaty universalization. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at this stage, let me invite the head of the Secretariat to provide overview presentation on the status of ATT participation. Mr. Secretary, please.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. I am grateful to the President and the co-chairs of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization for giving the Secretariat an opportunity to provide an overview of the status of ATT participation. We would make this presentation following the usual practice we've established over the years, where we start by providing a global overview of the participation in the ATT, followed by a regional overview. And thereafter, we'll look at the distribution of states by region in terms of their participation in the ATT. And we'll conclude by looking at the rate at which states became parties to the ATT. I request my colleagues to put the presentation on screen. My apologies, Mr. President, if I'm for a moment, please. All right, now we have the presentation, and I would ask my colleagues to move to slide number 1 of the presentation. In terms of general overview, we have 110 state parties at the present moment, as you'll be aware. It's a very good number to have at this point in time, but not a number to be complacent about, because we still need to have the treaty universalized, meaning we need to get much more states than we currently have. But whilst we have 110 state parties, we've got 31 states that have signed the ATT but have not yet joined, not ratified or acceded to the treaty. So they still have an extra step to go. And we also have 51 state that had signed the ATT but had later indicated that they do not intend to become a state party. So there's only one state in that category. And the other states who are UN member states who have not yet associated with the ATT are currently 54. So basically meaning that we still have 54 states that are not yet associated with the ATT. And it's important, therefore, as part of universalization efforts to try to reach out to those states and get them on board to become state parties. On the right of the screen is an indication of the pie chart. And the pie chart indicates very clearly, if you look at that against the UN membership, 56% of UN member states are already state parties to the ATT, 110 to be specific. But at the same time, we have 16% of them who are not yet signed the ATT, who have not yet ratified, now they have signed the ATT. And 54 are remaining outside, which is 28%. We are happy about the pie chart as it looks, but of course there is a lot of effort that we have to apply in getting, probably turning the pie chart to be green, to remove all the other colors but go for green. Next slide. In terms of distribution of states, I think it's important for us to reflect on that in terms of how states are distributed across all regions. In making this intervention about distribution of states, we're relying on the UN Statistic Division numbers, and there's a reason why we've chosen to do so. But on the left of the presentation, you can see the distribution of states by region. Basically meaning, as an example, there are 22 UN member states from the region Europe, and there are 28 member states of the UN from the region Africa, as an example. And I think that is how the distribution of UN member states are basically spread. But the pie chart or the graph on the right, or the chart on the right, reflects a distribution of state parties by region. Basically saying in each and every region, how many states have become states parties to the ATT. Of course, you will see then some kind of a converse picture here. As an example, on the left, we're indicating that 25% of UN member states are members, are from the Asian region. But however, when you come to the right, you realize that from the Asia region, only 9% of state parties to the ATT are coming from that region. So there is indeed a difference between 22 on the left, 25 on the left, and 9% on the right. But equally, you can see in the European region, now we have on the left an indication that 22% of UN member states are from the region Europe. But if you look to the right, you realize that those make up about 35% of state parties to the ATT. This basically indicates, it tells us a story. And the story that we get from here is that there are regions where there is still a growth opportunity for the ATT. And I think our universalization efforts will be directed towards that. I think the growth of the ATT in the European region, it has almost reached a very critical point. It's very high. But if you look at the other regions, there's quite a number of opportunities over there. If you can move to the next slide. In terms of regional overview, how do regions look like? What is the picture that you get in the regions? And again, all that you see over here is about how the region are spread in terms of ATT membership. Europe, as indicated, is the region with the most state parties, followed by, of course, the Americas, and followed by Africa. Asia seems to have the least number of state parties. And again, the picture is that we need to get to a point where we try to improve the membership of the ATT in that region, Asia, having the least number of state parties. So that is the picture that we get over here. But again, at the same time, part of the discussion of the treaty universalization discussion is to look at whether, what kind of tactics, what kind of narratives, what kind of strategies can we use to get more parties or states to become state parties to the ATT? And of course, that is a subject of discussion by the working group. But we have realized in the past discussions that targeting and placing a target, for instance, at some point, there was a target of having, in 2018, the target was to have 100 state parties, and that was reached. And all of us were excited about that. But what is the next target? Is it 110? We have reached 110 already in 2020. But what's the next target? Because once we have a target, probably we can begin to put effort behind the target and try to get to it. But those are discussions that the state parties must have and other stakeholders in this meeting. The next slide, please. It's about participation of states. Here we are indicating the rate at which states became state parties to the ATT. And of course, as a way of background, you will recall that the ATT was negotiated within the framework of the UN, and it was adopted then by the General Assembly in April of 2013. And it opened for signature on the 3rd of June 2013. And if you take that as a starting point in terms of trying to look at the years, we can say, look, from June 2013 to June 2014 is 1 year, and from 2014 to 2015 is a second year and third year. Apply that logic, and you will see that in the first year and the second year, many states became state parties to the ATT in the first three years. Year number 1, year number 2, and year number 3. And in year number 4, you started to see a decline in the number of states becoming state parties. And of course, we are aware that at that time, that is when the heavy lifting of state parties began. In the first 2 years, it was a momentum of the ATT negotiations and all of it. But after that, these are states who are becoming, from year number 4, these are states which are becoming state parties after having bought to the narrative that is being sold by state parties and others from this framework. So it's important as we move forward to realize that these numbers can improve only if there's effort that we put into it. You realize, therefore, that in year number 4, it's 7 states, in year number 5, 3 states. Year number 6, we've got 6. The following year is 4 and 4. And of course, it can't be 4 all the time. At some point, it has to go up, but it requires effort. The last slide, Mr. President, if I may, is actually the participation rate across a per region. And again, this is just a reflection of how the regions perform in terms of becoming state parties. And Europe, of course, in the first 2 years, they became the most states that became state parties. And there's a reason behind that. I think they have always had in place quite a number of initiatives regionally that had helped them to move towards the ATT. But after that, of course, they've reached almost a plateau. But other regions need to pick up. Africa as one is, and as well as Latin America and others. So this is a picture, Mr. President, that we see when you look at the status of participation at the present moment. And I would want it to end up here. And of course, therefore, what I sought to do is to create some points of discussion for this meeting in respect of what we can do to improve the picture that we currently see. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. The picture shows that we do have a lot of work to do, and that work should continue and should accelerate. Work has obviously slowed down a little bit, but it will pick up, and hopefully we will get to full membership. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at this stage, I would like to invite Ambassador Federico Villegas, in his capacity as my co-chair of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization, to join me in presenting the reports of the Working Group to the conference. Ambassador? Thank you, Ambassador Villegas. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. I will begin, I'll present the first part of the report, and I'll yield the floor to my colleague to give the rest of the report. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the draft report to the 7th Conference of States Parties to the Arms Trade Treaty is presented by us co-chairs, myself, and Ambassador Villegas. It is intended to reflect the efforts carried out in support of ATT's universalization and the Working Group in 2021. The report also proposes recommendations on steps to be taken with respect to ATT's universalization beyond this presidency, beyond CSP7. The preambular section of the treaty emphasizes the desirability of achieving universal adherence to the treaty. Article 17(4)(b) of the treaty provides that the Conference of States Parties shall, and I quote, consider and adopt recommendations regarding the implementation and operation of this treaty, in particular, the promotion of its universality. These provisions of the treaty highlight promotion of treaty universality as a critical element of the treaty deserving the attention of all ATT stakeholders. The working group was established by the 3rd Conference of States Parties to the ATT, CSP7, with the objective of leading the process of harmonizing thoughts and ideas on the issue of treaty universalization, with a view to determining the best approaches for taking the issue forward. CSP7 also endorsed the ATT-WGTU co-chairs draft report, including terms of reference for the working group on treaty universalization and the Working Group on Universalization's initial work plan. The 5th Conference of States Parties, which is CSP5, considered the ATT-WGTU co-chairs draft report and decided to adopt the ATT Universalization Toolkit. And this is in quotes, welcome pack for new states parties to the ATT, as well as encourage ATT stakeholders to translate those documents, 2 documents, into languages which will assist in promotion of the understanding of the treaty. It also requested the ATT Secretariat to upload both documents to the ATT website. And it requested the Secretariat to continue to analyze the trends and pace of universalization of the ATT and to report annually to the CSP, which the Secretariat has just done. These are the foundational documents as it pertains to the work and mandate of the WGTU during the period prior to CSP7. Let me now talk about the appointment of the WGTU co-chairs. CSP6 mandated the CSP7 presidency, which is myself, with the responsibility of facilitating the work of the working group until the next annual ordinary section of the conference, CSP6. On 28 October 2020, the CSP7 president appointed Ambassador Federico Villegas of Argentina, who was the CSP6 president, as a co-chair of the WGTU, with a view to building upon the work of previous co-chairs of the WGTU. Our mandate, updates on the outreach that we did. As CSP7 president, one of Sierra Leone's priorities has been encouraging states that have not yet joined the treaty to do so at the earliest. In this regard, the CSP7 president facilitated the preparation and processing of the 2020 ATT resolution at the first committee of the United Nations General Assembly, which was voted in favor by 150 states. The resolution specifically called upon all states that have not yet done so to ratify, accept, approve, or accede to the treaty in accordance with their respective constitutional processes in order to achieve its universalization. During this cycle, the WGTU co-chairs' efforts to promote the treaty have been impacted by the COVID-19 health and travel restrictions. That has impacted almost everything, as we all know. But despite this drawback, the two co-chairs conducted individual and joint universalization activities by engaging with permanent representatives of states that are not yet ATT states parties in order to ascertain their respective governments' interests and challenges in joining the ATT. Our president, the president of Sierra Leone, His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada Bio, wrote to heads of states whose countries have not yet become ATT state parties, encouraging them to join the treaty. We adopted a strategy of strategic prioritization, separating non-state parties into two groups. The first group included states considered to be close to joining the ATT based upon advancements made at the national level, including but not limited to signing and not ratifying the treaty. The second group were those states which have indicated that joining the ATT is a much longer prospect. The letters that the president of Sierra Leone wrote to the first group were personalized and sought to address the circumstances of those particular states. The president's letter was personally hand-delivered by me to 24 non-state parties, including 13 states from Africa, 7 states from Asia, 1 state from Europe, 1 state from the Americas, and 2 states from Oceania. 29 letters from the president were sent directly to diplomatic missions and consular offices of the remaining states in the second category. In addition, the CSP7 presidency has been working on a project to engage members of parliament in the universalization of the ATT. I must mention at this point that on account of the letter, we did get acknowledgements from almost all of the countries that we sent the letters to, and we got a very positive feedback from many of them, and a very concrete one from at least one of them, the Gambia, which sent a representative and which have announced yesterday that they will be joining the treaty. So, in addition to those efforts, as I mentioned, to kick off the project in a more concrete way, another concrete way, a joint letter signed by me, the President, CSP7 President, and the Interparliamentary Union Secretary General, Mr. Martin Chongong, requesting parliamentarians to raise awareness of the treaty and generate a constructive dialogue on the impacts of the illicit flows of small arms and light weapons, has been sent out to 80+ parliaments across the world. I felt this was extremely important because during my round of meetings with ambassadors and heads of missions, distributing the letter from my president, I became aware of the fact that much of the problem could be procedural, that some of the ratification of airports are bogged down because of lack of capacity of parliament or lack of awareness of the serious problems that ATT wishes to address. During the informal consultations held in July of this year, Argentina and Sierra Leone, the co-chairs, organized 2 online meetings on universalization to build momentum in the lead up to CSP7. The first meeting was for a group of 16 states that were assessed as being likely to join the ATT, and the second meeting was for a group of 38 states. Officials based in Geneva and capitals around the world were invited to the meetings. Also participating were the ATT Secretariat, which spoke on the process to be undertaken to become a state party and support that is available for that, and control arms, which spoke on why states should join the treaty. The co-chairs welcomed the participation of all states, especially Colombia, Fiji, Kenya, Malaysia, the Philippines, Turkey, and Zimbabwe, all of which spoke on where they stand in terms of joining the treaty, particularly the progress made and challenges encountered towards joining the ATT. Some countries expressed the specific challenges they encounter in joining the treaty, including, but not limited to, volatile neighborhoods and the security concerns posed by adjacent countries that have not yet joined the treaty. There were also, as I mentioned, bureaucratic hurdles, particularly changes in the composition of parliament and key executive offices delaying the domestic ratification process. Throughout this work on universalization, our working group has coordinated with other stakeholders, including civil society. We, the co-chairs, have met with the state, which has a significant role in international arms trade, on its status in relation to the ATT. The co-chairs highlighted the importance of the participation and engagement of that state in the next CSP7 and invited that state to join its status in relation to the ATT, mainly taking into account the importance of the participation of these states in the diversion information exchange forum meetings, in which, due to confidentiality of the information that this subsidiary body shares, only the state parties and signatories are able to participate. Let me now give the floor to my co-chair, Ambassador Villegas, to present the rest of the report. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning to all, and thank you very much for the introduction of our work together. I would like to complement what Ambassador Berry mentioned with some few remarks. First of all, the conclusion of our joint working group is that states have extended their support to the universalization efforts that the working group is doing. Furthermore, in providing an update on universalization, the ATT Secretariat said that nowadays there are 100 state parties, 5 of which acceded in 2020, but we have to remember that those 5 acceded while we were in the pandemic. So that's a very good sign that even though the world was basically stopped, we still had 5 states that were engaged. Afghanistan, China, Namibia, Niue, and Sao Tome and Principe. And we are very glad with the announcement that the President also mentioned yesterday by the government of Gambia, which is a result of the very good work that the Ambassador Berry has been doing since he took office in Africa, for having other African states joining. But as the Secretary mentioned, the rate of universalization has been decreasing. That is why we should not put our guard down on having an aggressive, in a positive way, aggressive public diplomacy of ATT to have more states joining. Just some few points of the discussions we had on universalization with other states. And information. The European Union announced that it is going to fund the publication of the ATT Universalization Toolkit. The toolkit will be published in a brochure in advance of this conference. In Asia, for example, the Republic of Korea reminded participants that in 2020 it had earmarked funds to translate the ATT universalization toolkit and the welcome pack into several Asian languages. Japan expressed its gratitude for this work and the importance of increasing outreach to the Asia-Pacific region. The Philippines informed that it was making efforts to harmonize their national legislation with the treaty's obligations and added that its government is working on ratifying the treaty as soon as the necessary conditions were met. It also encouraged greater outreach to the Asian region. Some states provided updates on their universalization activities undertaken since CSP6. They shared information on domestic legislative processes and their efforts to harmonize their national legislation with the treaty's obligation as a precondition to ratification. They also discussed bilateral outreach meetings, regional workshops, as well as assistance received and provided to support their efforts to join the treaty. Participants also highlighted the importance of international cooperation and assistance in assisting countries to strengthen their national capacities to fulfill their obligations under the treaty, underlined the importance of carrying out outreach to parliamentarians in countries who are likely to ratify or accede to the treaty. Several proposals were made to strengthen the coordination of universalization efforts. For instance, a proposal was made to hold informal meetings in advance of each conference to facilitate enhanced coordination and collaboration among ATT office holders and states parties on treaty universalization strategies. Others highlighted that the efforts should be focused on arms exporting and importing countries, as well as in those regions with limited ATT engagement. Panama informed the participants of its contribution to treaty universalization through the Human Rights Council Universal Periodic Review Mechanism by recommending to states under review to positively consider ratifying the ATT. Some delegations highlighted the important role played by civil society in ATT outreach activities. Uncontrolled Arms presented efforts it has undertaken to promote ATT universalization in the regions of Asia Pacific, the Middle East, North of Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, while highlighting the need for more assistance to be provided to countries of those regions. We were reminded that all stakeholders have an important role to play in promoting and achieving universalization of the ATT. So the question now, taking into account what the Secretary informed in the last report regarding the decreasing rate of universalization, with fewer states joining the treaty each year, is which is the best way to move forward on ATT universalization? As you know, universalization is critical to achieving the objectives of the ATT. Although 2020 saw 5 new state parties to the ATT, greater efforts will be needed in the future to maintain such momentum. From the work undertaken this year with Ambassador Berry, and especially the feedback received during our informal consultations and CSP7 President's bilateral meetings, Ambassador Berry and I, as co-chairs, have concluded that the following points will be important towards making progress on universalization. First, ongoing efforts are needed to promote understanding of the ATT's objectives among non-state parties. All too often, there is a misperception that this is a disarmament treaty. Second, it is important to engage in dialogue addressing the benefits of ATT at both the national and regional levels. Such dialogue can respond to concerns that states may have about how joining the ATT will impact on their security. Third, for some states, cooperation and assistance will be essential to their joining and implementing the ATT. For this reason, ATT states, parties, and stakeholders must continue to explore all avenues for promoting and supporting the Voluntary Trust Fund. Fourth, direct dialogue with non-state parties is needed to understand what are the challenges to progress in universalization and where support could be provided. Fifth, coordination and information sharing among ATT office holders, the fund, state parties, and ATT stakeholders will assist universalization effort. Such coordination could be facilitated through informal exchanges led by future presidents. And finally, ATT state parties could make a significant contribution to treaty universalization through the Human Rights Council Universal Periodic Review mechanism by recommending to states under review to positively consider ratifying the ATT. This is a new element in our universalization strategy that has come in the last year. And indeed, we have to remember that the ATT is the first treaty ever to link arms trade with human rights. Because, of course, as we all know, the objective of preventing armed diversion to fall in the wrong hands to commit atrocities. Therefore, the interdisciplinary and mainstreaming of ATT in different bodies, it's very important. And the new element of this last year of having several delegations in the Universal Periodic Review recommending states to accede the ATT as a way of promoting human rights, it's a very good public diplomacy strategy for us. And it will be encouraged to other states to use this in their future approaches to the Universal Periodic Review. Thank you very much for your attention, and I yield the floor to our distinguished friend, President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. Thank you, thank you. We shall now proceed to opening the floor for speakers. I have a list of 13 confirmed speakers. I'll suggest, in the interest of time, that we limit our contributions to around 2 minutes. We certainly don't want the situation that happened yesterday, whereby a major item had to be pushed to the next day. We don't have too many days left for this conference. So let me read out the list of names, and then we'll, in order in which they will speak. Mexico, New Zealand, China, European Union, Spain, Japan, Honduras. We have Haiti, and we have a list of organizations: Interparliamentary Union, Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons, ICRC, and we have NGOs and Industry, Control Arms, and MAT for Peace, Development, and Human Rights. I have before the four countries: Cameroon, United States of America, Philippines, and the Republic of Korea. So we'll do that. Mexico, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of the co-chairs from the working group of universalization, the ambassadors from Sierra Leone and from Argentina. A high number of state parties is very significant if we take into account what happens with other instruments for the control of arms. This momentum cannot be interpreted as a lack of support for the instrument. It's normal for more countries to adhere to the instrument, and that in the midterm, it becomes more difficult to have to increase the number of countries that adhere the instrument. For this reason, it's relevant to listen to the reports of the chairs of the Working Group of Universalization. We think that their perspective of speaking to those who are not party and making a differentiation between those who see adherence as feasible and those who don't. And I think we should try and convince them more persuasively with the inputs obtained. The conclusions from the chair confirm that a good strategy is to address parliamentarians to try and convince them of adhering to the treaty. We also think that another factor to bear into account should be to take on board the main importers and exporters from each region who influence the trends in weapons transfer. It's in bilateral, multilateral, and regional meetings, more effort should be put into the promotion of universalization and its effective and full implementation. The work carried out by different stakeholders, namely by organizations from civil society who have worked in favor of universalization, merits to be acknowledged in this room. If we want the ATT to attain its objectives, all stakeholders of international community have to commit to its obligations. Otherwise, we will leave spaces open to traffickers and countries who facilitate their interests. For this reason, we need to make our priority a full universalization of the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mexico. We went a little over time. Kindly, delegates, we are getting more list people wanting to speak, and we want to give every delegate a chance to speak out. Thank you very much, Mexico, for those very kind words. The next speaker, New Zealand, kindly take the floor.
Thank you very much. Aotearoa New Zealand welcomes you, Ambassador, to the presidency of this conference. We thank you for ensuring that it's able to proceed in a hybrid format, which we see as the most inclusive option available to us in the current circumstances. Despite the devastating and wide-ranging consequences of COVID-19, it's crucial that the ATT community continues to meet regularly to take stock of our treaty's progress in achieving its aims of establishing a gold standard for regulating the international trade in conventional arms, as well as preventing and eradicating their illicit trade and diversion. Although I did not take the floor under the previous agenda item, please be assured that New Zealand fully supports your working paper and the sharing of best practices to prevent the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, strengthening stockpile management and security in order to prevent diversion. New Zealand welcomes that in 7 years, our treaty has 110 states parties and 31 signatories. We extend a special welcome to the treaty's newest state party, our Pacific neighbour, Niue. Yet it is concerning that the rate of universalisation appears to be tapering off. This is in part to be expected, and we appreciate the challenging environment for outreach and some states' limited capacity to engage on the ATT at present, given their competing priorities. But we must continue to champion the treaty's universalisation by thinking of creative ways to promote the treaty's benefits, to understand the challenges to universalisation, by responding to the concerns of states outside the treaty, and to providing support where it is required, including through the Voluntary Trust Fund. For our part, New Zealand has continued our close and regular bilateral engagements with our partners in the Pacific in a virtual format over the past year. There is broad recognition that universalisation of the ATT, including realising its important security and developmental benefits, is strongly in the interest of states in our region. One concern we often hear about joining the ATT is the burden of annual reporting. To this end, we welcome the efforts of the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, Mexico and Romania, to improve the voluntary reporting templates and make them more user-friendly. We also gratefully acknowledge the support provided by the EU for the publication of the Universalisation Toolkit in all official UN languages. Finally, we wish to remind states and observers that the model legislation produced by New Zealand and the Small Arms Survey to assist prospective states in preparing for their membership is available both online and in hard copy. I thank you.
And I thank you very much, New Zealand, and thanks for the support to our paper. Next, we have China.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Chinese
塞拉利昂主席、阿根廷主席全面详细的报告表示感谢，对 WTO 工作组为促进条约普遍化。
We would like to thank the President of Argentina and Sierra Leone for their work. And we would also like to thank the Secretariat of ATT.
为WTO 工作组为促进条约普遍化所做的所有有效。
We thank them for their effective work in terms of the treaty universalization.
对冈比亚宣布加入
With regard to Gambia, for their announcement of joining ATT, we welcome it.
中方注意到，
China notes that
条约生效近7年来，
7 years after the entering into force of ATT, its purposes and objectives have been recognized by an increasing number of countries, with the number of the state parties reached 110. The treaty universalization keeps increasing.
去年7月，
On July of last year,
中国正式加入，
China officially acceded to ATT,
成为缔约国。
becoming a member of the ATT family.
为此，
China feels delighted and proud of it.
同时中方
In the meantime, China also notes that some leading countries in arms trade still remain outside of the treaty, and in particular, the single largest exporter of conventional weapons. Not only it did not ratify the treaty, but it has even withdrawn its signature. China calls on this country to right the wrong
尽快接受
and
加入。
ratify and accede to the treaty at the earliest date.
同时，我们还
Meanwhile, we also call on other countries to give positive consideration and accede to the treaty as soon as possible.
中方认为，
China believes that strengthening international cooperation and assistance is meaningful for increasing the treaty universalization. Some developing countries on treaty compliance might encounter some real difficulties in terms of capacity, technology, and funding.
中方呼吁有
China calls on countries that have the ability to strengthen international cooperation and assistance towards developing countries and encourage more countries to join the treaty.
中方愿同各地
China stands ready, together with all the state parties, to help countries in need to strengthen their willingness to join the treaty,
加强履约能力建设，
enhance capacity building of treaty compliance,
为促进各国有效履约、
and
条约普遍性、
play active roles in promoting effective compliance and increasing treaty universalization. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, China. We have, there's one more name, speaker, ASER. After that, I would like to suggest that we close the speakers list. So I go straight to European Union, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor, and thank you for your personal efforts towards further universalization and for the efforts of your co-chair, Ambassador Villegas. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries Turkey, Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Albania, and the EFTA countries Iceland, Norway, members of the EEA, as well as Georgia, align themselves with this statement. As stakeholders and states parties to the ATT, it is our common goal to establish the highest possible standards in the international trade in conventional arms and to prevent and eradicate the illicit trade in conventional arms and ammunition and prevent their diversion. At the same time, we need to step up our efforts and continue to... Sorry? I'll continue. At the same time, we need to step up our efforts and continue to work towards full universalization of these norms. We reiterate our call on all UN member states, especially the major arms importers, exporters, and transit states, to sign, ratify, or accede to the ATT without further delay. The EU urges other states parties to increase our collective engagement and outreach efforts to non-state parties, underlining the benefits of joining the ATT and thus contributing to international and regional peace and security and stability. We very much welcome the letter sent by the President of Sierra Leone calling on states to accede to the ATT. The EU considers it important to renew the momentum in order to achieve full universalization of this important treaty. Since the last CSP, the ATT has entered into force for Afghanistan, China, Niue, and Sao Tome and Principe. We hope the accession of Afghanistan and China will inspire other countries in Asia to follow suit shortly. Of course, we very much welcome also the announcement made by the Minister of Defense from Gambia yesterday. The EU and its member states continue to play an active role in ATT universalization efforts through the various EU outreach programs and in bilateral dialogues on disarmament, on proliferation and arms control. We call on all states parties to advocate for the ratification of the ATT in their own high-level bilateral contexts. It is essential that the treaty receive the necessary attention, including at the political level. It is not the ATT's objective to hinder the legitimate arms trade or to impose measures regulating the trade of arms on the domestic market. The ATT clearly recognizes the legitimate rights and interests of states with regard to the arms trade and production, as well as the right to self-defense enshrined in Article 51 of the Charter, of the UN Charter. It is neither an exporters treaty nor an importers treaty. The ATT is relevant to all participants in the international trade in conventional arms. In this regard, we hope that the publication of the ATT Universalization Toolkit, already mentioned by many, adopted by all states parties at the 5th Conference of States Parties, will contribute to common understanding of the treaty objectives and will serve to strengthen universalization outreach activities. We are pleased that we could fund the printing of the toolkit into a brochure in all UN languages so that we could join the excellent initiative of the Republic of Korea, who translated this toolkit in several other languages. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, European Union. Thank you. The next speaker is Spain.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, y muchas gracias también al embajador Villegas. Me gustaría, en primer lugar, y como ya han hecho las
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Ambassador Villegas. As other speakers before me, I would like to welcome those states that have joined the treaty in the past year: Afghanistan, China, Niue, San Tome, and Principe. We'd also like to welcome the announcement made yesterday by the Minister of the Gambia. The treaty to date has 110 state parties committed in the prevention and eradication of illicit trade of arms. When one exceeds the treaty, one commits itself to avoid diversion to illicit markets, and one also assumes a series of responsibilities and obligations in the field of transparency, accountability, and cooperation with the rest of state parties. We'd like to call upon the 31 signatory states of the treaty, and we exhort them to complete the process of ratification. We'd like to call on the 54 state members of the UN who have still not acceded to the treaty, and to the state who has expressed that they have no intention on completing their accession to the treaty, to do so as soon as possible. Universalization of the treaty, Chair, is key for us to obtain the objectives of this instrument. We will do everything in our hands to promote universalization of the treaty in order to avoid diversion of weapons to illicit markets. This is highly important because there are still states who are main producers, exporters, importers, or transit states who do not belong to the ATT community. The challenge of convincing them to accede to the treaty is something we share with the rest of state parties. And lastly, Chair, we'd like to recall our commitment with your working paper. And we'd also like to support the toolkit of measures that has been developed to facilitate implementation and universalization of the treaty.
Right on time. Next on my list, Japan.
Mr. Co-Chairs, first of all, Japan would like to express its heartfelt welcome to the countries which have newly joined the treaty. Japan would like to express also its sincere gratitude to Ambassador Guberi and Ambassador Villegas for their treaty universalization efforts as co-chairs for the working group on treaty universalization throughout the CSP7 cycle, despite the unprecedented circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like also to thank the Director of Secretariat for his very informative presentation. When Japan co-chaired this working group during the CSP4 and CSP5 cycles, we often heard from non-state parties the importance of explanatory packages about the significance of the ATT. Japan also realized that accessibility to those documents in their own languages was key for them to promote their understanding on the importance of the ATT, and in particular, to enable their national stakeholders to engage in the path towards joining the treaty. This consideration has led to the adoption of the universalization toolkit and welcome pack at CSP5, which were translated into the UN official languages and made available on the ATT website. Japan highly appreciates the initiative by the government of the Republic of Korea to translate them into the Asian languages, and would also like to thank the European Union for the publication of the ATT Universalization Toolkit in a brochure format ahead of the CSP7. As expressed in the working group in April, Japan places great importance on the universalization of the ATT, in particular in the Asia-Pacific region. Together with Australia, New Zealand, and Control Arms, Japan co-hosted the Asia-Pacific Universalization Roundtable in a virtual format in June this year. Japan has also encouraged non-state parties to join the treaty, taking the opportunity to hold bilateral dialogues on disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control where possible. On this occasion, Japan would like to encourage all non-state parties, including signatory states and observer states, to join the treaty as soon as possible. Japan will continue to work for the universalization of the ATT. I thank you, co-chairs.
And I thank you very much, Japan. Next on my list, Honduras.
Chair, having heard the presentation made by the Secretariat on the participation as well as the report from the working group on universalization, we would like to congratulate on behalf of my government, my delegation, for all the work that the working group on universalization has conducted on this last and complicated year. To promote and to inform on the treatment is one of the main pillars of this treaty. Having reached 110 state parties, it reflects the work that has been carried out by all co-chairs who have navigated through difficulties and have rendered this all their actions a success with the different consultations that they carried out in July of this year, as well as many other diplomatic conversations that have been held at different levels in order to encourage the number of ratifications of the treaty. We would also like to congratulate the different progress made by the working group on the publication of the toolkit on treaty universalization, as well as the welcome pack. Chair, Honduras would like to support the efforts that are being carried out in universalization, but believes that it is still necessary to continue supporting as more strongly this progress in order to reach the objectives set by the treaty. In this regard, and relating to item 4 of our agenda, I very gladly would like to say that my country has set a new law for the control of firearms, munitions, explosives, and other related material, which entered into force on the 8th of February 2019. We have also created a bilateral institutional force that operates in all land borders of Honduras with the 3 countries of the Central American region, with the finality of combating all sorts of illicit trade in order to fulfill the treaty. This institutional force is a bilateral force that is working jointly with our 3 neighbors and has achieved many goals so far. I would also like to say that both defense and security sections of the Honduras government are referencing and stocking all weapons and arms with all their serial numbers, and we carry out a very strict control. We carry out an annual report on this regard. We have also implemented a new mechanism through which all weapons found in illicit trade are deposited in specific stockpile areas. Dear Chair, I would like to conclude my intervention welcoming new member states, state parties to this treaty, underlying the efforts that your chairmanship has carried out throughout the last year. Thank you. The interpreter would like to inform that the sound was not of high standard. Thank you.
And I thank you very much, Honduras. Next on my list, I have Haiti.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to congratulate you on your leadership of CSP7 of the ATT and for all the efforts that you have made to eradicate the illicit trade of SALWs. This is something that is very important. I would also like to pay tribute to the work that has been carried out by the Working Group on Treaty Universalization, WGTU, Sierra Leone and Argentina. Mr. Chairman, my delegation is aware that the process of ratification has still some way to go. In our country, we've had problems, dysfunctioning of our parliament in particular, and for this reason it is very difficult to make progress in the area of ratification to the ATT. This being said, my delegation is preoccupied by the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons. This is something that has aggravated violence in certain regions of our country, that has increased the socioeconomic problems in our country. And because of this illicit trade, we have seen that it has been very difficult to reach the sustainable development goals. Furthermore, there was recently the assassination of Mr. Moise, the president of our country, which is a terrible consequence of the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons. So in collaboration with the Friends of Haiti, we will continue to take a series of measures at the national level to eradicate this scourge. The technical assistance which is offered is something that we will call upon. And there is increasing tension in different parts of the world. It's very important for this reason to put an end to the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons. In conclusion, my delegation would like to reaffirm the determination of Haiti to take fully part in the ATT. This is something that is very important for us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Haiti, and although we have done this in a bilateral way, I'll do so now as well to express condolences on the tragic events leading to the death of your Prime Minister, or President. We will now move on to Interparliamentary Union.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I'm speaking on behalf of the IPU Secretary General, Mr. Martin Chungong, who is unfortunately not available today. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, while no one can deny the terrible humanitarian impact illicit arms flows have on populations, these flows escalate violence, destabilize societies and communities, and lead to human insecurity, all of which have countless devastating long-term consequences. They jeopardize the future of millions, especially that of women and young people. As the global organization of national parliaments, the Interparliamentary Union addresses regularly the issue and advocates for a strengthened control of trafficking in small arms and light weapons. Already in its 2006 resolution, the IPU called on parliaments to engage actively in combating illicit trade and diversion of conventional arms and encourage them to agree to a set of global principles for international arms transfers. However, in spite of the many achievements in this area, much remains to be done. The fact that so many nations are yet to take meaningful steps toward ridding their societies of these everyday tools of violence shows that we need to better understand the reasons behind non-adherence to the treaty. There can be no blanket application of solutions, which is why we need to change our approach to consider the diversity of people's needs while prioritizing their safety and security and fostering national ownership of the different solutions. Parliaments and parliamentarians as people representatives are the bridge between populations and governments. They can advocate and legislate for societies free of armed violence to allow their constituents to prosper. Parliaments are the best place to promote the Armed Trade Treaty as a tool to eradicate the root of illicit weapons proliferation and improve people's lives. To help raise the interest and commitment of parliaments and advance ATT universalization, the IPU has, as you kindly mentioned, Mr. President, a project to gather parliamentarians of states that are not yet a party to the ATT to discuss and address the specific roadblocks as they are holding them back from joining the treaty. The project was built with inputs from the permanent mission of Sierra Leone in Geneva. On the 2nd of September, we will jointly hold an interactive panel to share more information on this initiative. I encourage you to register for the event, and we would also highly appreciate your support to this parliamentary initiative. Well, to conclude, I would like to emphasize that there can be no development without peace and security. Sustainable development and sustainable peace can only be achieved by the people. Thank you for your attention.
And I thank you very much, IPU. I thank you. Next on my list, Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's an honor to greet you on behalf of the Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons. My name is Karin Olofsson, and I'm the Secretary General of the Forum. I would like to express heartfelt gratitude to the President of CSP7, Her Excellency Lansana Geberi, for your tireless efforts towards the ATT, working to eradicate illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and ensure efficient stockpile management, which is the thematic focus of this ATT presidency. Armed conflicts and violence, independent of their scale, are perpetrated by the uncontrolled availability of SOLV, highlighting the need for concise and effective steps to tackle this proliferation. According to the Small Arms Survey, more than 1 billion SOLV are circulating worldwide, causing the death of over 223,300 people every year. The consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrate that the widespread availability of SOLV hinders efforts to provide humanitarian and development support to the most vulnerable. The UN has stated an increase in domestic violence of approximately 30% since the outbreak of the pandemic. The Institute for Economics and Peace estimated that more than 400 million young people lived in violent contexts. This underscores the interconnectedness of society's challenges and the importance of the women, peace and security and the youth, peace and security agendas in arms control processes. Members of Parliament, MPs, play a central role in preventing SOLV-related violence, given their legislative oversight and awareness-raising roles, holding governments accountable, and in bridging the gap between international arms control instruments and the regional and national level. This allows MP to enhance universalization efforts, ownership, and implementation of the ATT. We are pleased to learn about the efforts of the ATT presidency and the IPU, as previously mentioned here, to engage MPs in the universalization of the treaty. The forum has also implemented projects including MPs' efforts in Africa, Asia and Pacific, Latin America, and Middle East and Northern Africa on universalization and implementation since its inception. And we remain committed to further support parliamentary action and for cooperation. The forum is hosting a side event precisely on the issue on September 3rd, and you are all warmly welcomed. Furthermore, the forum, as co-sponsor and publishing partner, contributes to the process of the Parliamentary Handbook, Assuring Our Common Future, to support the vital UN Secretary General's disarmament agenda. Actively including women and young MPs in ATT universalization and implementation is essential for policies to reflect adequately the realities of those affected by illicit arms transfers. Therefore, we encourage all states to consider parliamentary involvement, as well as understanding the national realities faced by MPs in the implementation of the treaty. Finally, the pandemic and its consequences have demonstrated how crucial it is for the world to come together, to unite, to prevent the uncontrolled availability of SOLV, for the security, rights, and well-being of every child, woman, and man, to reduce human suffering. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much. Thank you, Parliamentary Forum. And I move to ICRC.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll deliver abridged remarks. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, expresses its appreciation to you, Mr. President, and to Ambassador Villegas for your work as co-chairs of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization. The ICRC welcomes yesterday's announcement by the Gambia that it will join the treaty. There is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented us all with unprecedented challenges. And this is possibly why we have seen no states joining the treaty since the last Conference of States Parties. It is incumbent on all stakeholders now to make sure this remains an exception. The ICRC urges all signatories and all states that are not yet party to the ATT to accede to the treaty at the earliest opportunity. The ICRC also acknowledges and welcomes steps taken by several states at the national level to enable their adherence to the treaty, and we stand ready to support these efforts. The ICRC's advisory service on IHL here in Geneva and our delegations in capitals around the world offer their technical assistance to states in support of the adoption and implementation of the treaty. In the ICRC's view, The co-chair's draft report rightly underlines the importance of dialogue with states not yet party to promote understanding of the ATT's objectives, dispel any misconceptions, and highlight the treaty's humanitarian benefits. Over the course of last year, the ICRC has promoted adherence with non-signatory states in Latin America, Europe, East Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Recognizing the specificities of regional arms dynamics, the ICRC supports the identification and creation of opportunities to discuss the treaty at regional and sub-regional levels. For example, in Africa, we collaborate closely with the African Union in the framework of its Silencing the Guns initiative. The ICRC and the Pretoria office of the Institute for Security Studies also co-hosted an online webinar entitled Time for Action on the Arms Trade Treaty in November 2020. And later this year, our annual East African Regional IHL conference will focus on the ATT. The ICRC will continue to work tirelessly to support states parties in their implementation of the ATT to the highest possible standard. The faithful implementation of the treaty is the most compelling testimony to its effectiveness and will go a long way in attracting other states to join. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much. I now move on to quickly control arms, please.
Mr. President, Control Arms wishes to express its appreciation for the work of the co-chairs of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization. Even with no new state parties this year, the work conducted on universalization amid the COVID-19 pandemic has laid a solid foundation, which we hope will result in concrete outcomes in the coming year. We also welcome the announcement made by the Gambia of its intention to accede to the Arms Trade Treaty and look forward to welcoming it as a state party. In moving forward on universalization, Control Arms supports the conclusion in the WGTU report that coordination and information sharing between all stakeholders can assist universalization efforts. In this regard, forming an informal universalization contact group in Geneva could be a practical initiative to advance universalization, even during a time when delegations must operate within the restrictions imposed by COVID-19. Control Arms calls on the WGTU to focus its efforts on regional engagement approaches as set out in the original WGTU mandate. Many states who have not yet joined the ATT, especially in Asia and the Middle East and North Africa, can benefit from tailored outreach and engagement to address specific regional challenges. Engaging regional stakeholders to lead these efforts is critical to its success. In this regard, with Germany's support, Control Arms is studying the potential impact regional organization can have on ATT universalization and implementation. We also encourage the WGTU to set a target on universalization. A concrete and tangible number, such as 125 states parties by 2025, could assist in galvanizing all stakeholders' efforts on universalization and bring much needed focus to this area of work. For our part, Control Arms has continued to follow up directly with non-state parties to encourage them to join the treaty. This year, we again welcome the opportunity to co-host with Australia, Japan, and New Zealand a roundtable on universalization in the Asia-Pacific region. We look forward to the first ASEAN member state joining the ATT. Control Arms also continues to highlight the positive impact of the ATT on the national, regional, and international levels by directly engaging with national governments through its ATT Academy programs. Finally, Control Arms welcomes the European Union Council decision in support of the universalization of the ATT. This is an important initiative and one that we hope will make a significant progress. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Controller Arms, and let me once again thank Controller Arms for the enormous support that they've given this presidency. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next on my list, Matt for Peace, Development and Human Rights.
شكرا للسيد الرئيس. ترحب مؤسسة معهد السلام والتنمية وحقوق الإنسان بعقد المؤتمر السابع للدول الأطراف وتثمن بالجهود المبذولة من جانب المشاركين للالتزام بالمعاهدة وتستغل الفرصة للمشاركة في تلك المناقشة الهامة المتعلقة بعالمية المعاهدة. كما ترحب معهد بالجهود المبذولة في دعم الدول للانضمام إلى المعاهدة. فالأمم المتحدة في عملها لمساعدة الناس في جميع أنحاء العالم تواجه كل يوم التأثير السلبي للتراخي في الضوابط على تجارة الأسلحة، حيث أدى التوافر الجاهز للأسلحة والذخيرة إلى معاناة الإنسانية وقمع سياسي وجرائم حرب وإرهاب بين السكان المدنيين.
One of the most important goals of sustainable development is education, so it has become necessary to scale up training and awareness amongst young people about the dangers of using weapons and the importance of human rights law and international humanitarian law. More importantly, it discourages investment and hampers development in countries experiencing conflict and high levels of violence, which also affects its ability to achieve the sustainable development goals. The United Nations, in its work to help people around the world, faces every day the negative impact of lax controls of arms trade. One of the most important goals of sustainable development is education, so it has become necessary to scale up. 20% of the youth have knowledge and become aware of treaties' objectives, are also aware of the dangers of these weapons. Fortunately, 30% of civil society organizations have awareness-raising campaigns and training courses on ATT. Therefore, the Mount Foundation recommends engaging the youth through training and education on the dangers and disposal of small arms and light weapons, as well as assisting training civil society organization and promoting the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt, for Peace, Development and Human Rights. I now call upon Cameron to take the floor, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to be able to take the floor today. And given it is the first time that my delegation has taken the floor during this session, I would like to congratulate you very warmly for the professional way you have led our work over the last year, in spite of the difficulties resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can rely fully on the cooperation of my country. As regards to the universalization of the treaty, my country would like to point out that this is something that is very significant if we want to reach the objectives of international stability and security that is shared by all member states. Ladies and gentlemen, as regards to the objectives of the ATT, if we want to realize them, it is very important to increase the number of states parties. This will make the implementation of the treaty more effective, and it will enable a better control of SALWs, the munitions, parts, and components. And I take this opportunity to pay tribute to Gambia, to the Gambia who will be joining us very soon. In light of past experience, destabilization of political power has been witnessed in certain countries, means that there will be an increase in the flow of arms and an increase in the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons. Hence, the significance of the ATT. It is something that is very important if we want to stem the flow of these weapons. There are many such weapons moving around freely in Central Africa, and for this reason we would like to encourage as many countries in our region to join the ATT. I would like to remind you very briefly of the conditions under which we joined the ATT. We were considered to be a country of peace and a country that is in a region that is otherwise troubled, and we decided to sign the ATT in 2014 and ratify it in 2018. And with the support of a number of international partners and the Voluntary Trust Fund in particular, we have invested in awareness-raising campaigns to be able to create the necessary synergy between the parliamentarians, administration, civil society, journalists, and other stakeholders at the national level. Ladies and gentlemen, my delegation feels that ratification is the key for better universalization of our treaty. Of course, this is a long and complex process, depending on the legal context of each state, but this is something that is more important than anything else, because the idea is, of course, to save human lives and to achieve peace and stability at the global level. I would like to conclude by reminding you of measures taken by the highest authority in our country to promote the objectives of the ATT at the national level and at the sub-regional level as well. Prior to the ratification of the ATT, we adopted a law on 14th of December 2016 relating to the control of weapons and their ammunition. And a decree was voted in 2018 in this context. It relates to demobilization and reintegration of troops. And for this reason, we are making progress in the right direction. We have organized a series of activities and webinars and workshops to sensitize the stakeholders regarding the use of small arms and light weapons. We have also destroyed stockpiles. This is something that was quite impressive with the support of the United Nations and the African Union, as well as other partners, bilateral and multilateral. This was a campaign that was in line with the commemoration of the month of amnesty in Africa, adopted in the Continental Initiative, Silence the Guns. This is a ceremony that enabled my country to launch a discussion on the various challenges in this area. Plus, we have had capacity building activities in 2020 with the support of Germany and with the support of UNODA as well. This was gender sensitive. This is something that's very important if we want to implement the ATT effectively. And we also discussed the international tracing instrument. So this is an opportunity for me to call for a greater solidarity of the various partners, technical and financial, which, like Cameroon, have difficulties in this area. The Cameroon law regarding stockpile management is a very useful one. This being said, in my country and in other countries of the sub-region, record keeping is a difficulty, be it digital or physical. This is one of the challenges that we have to meet, and the countries of Central Africa, we believe, should have the necessary resources for the marking of weapons, for record keeping, and proper stockpile management. And we are thankful to the various partners, bilateral and multilateral, to strengthen our skills and competencies in this area. As president of the Central African Convention, the Kinshasa Convention, well, my country is turning to other countries to find the necessary support and prepared to discuss any possible solution to support our sub-region to make sure that we can spare our populations from the dire effects of the use of small arms and light weapons. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Cameron. With great anticipation and a hearty welcome, I yield the floor to the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have come from Washington, D.C. this week to take the floor under the agenda item Treaty Universalization to underscore the continuing commitment of the United States to the responsible international trade in conventional arms. The United States has long supported strong and effective national controls on the international transfer of conventional arms, and the Arms Trade Treaty is an important tool for promoting those controls internationally. For the United States, our approach to arms transfers is laid out in our Conventional Arms Transfer Policy, or CAT policy. The Biden-Harris administration recognizes conventional arms transfers have significant implications for U.S. national security and foreign policy interests, and the CAT policy establishes the United States priority and criteria used for adjudicating arms transfer decisions. The 2018 CAT policy reflected the previous administration's priorities, as did its decision in 2019 that it was not in the United States' national interest to become a state party to the ATT. President Biden has made clear that diplomacy and human rights are at the center of U.S. foreign policy. We believe it's important to publicly reflect these changes in a new CAT policy, so we've been working to revise the policy to reflect this administration's priorities. This revised CAT policy will help us build and maintain strategic partnerships that reflect the values and interests of the United States. The revised policy will more clearly highlight the connection between the respect for international law and human rights and U.S. national security interests in arms transfers. It will reflect this administration's priorities to strengthen alliances, lead with diplomacy, and elevate respect for international law and human rights. The new CAT policy will better frame the intent and priorities of the Biden-Harris administration and formalize the approach of the administration as adopted on arms transfers decisions that have been in effect since President Biden entered the White House in January. The revised CAT policy should be finalized shortly and released as a public document. When it is, the United States will then use that policy framework to review specific arms transfers issues, including determining the proper relationship of the United States to the Arms Trade Treaty. I look forward to being able to announce the results of that review at a future ATT meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States, and thank you for traveling all the way from Washington, D.C. to be with us here. I now yield the floor to the Philippines, please.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The Philippines continues to implement the provisions of the Strategic Trade Management Act, a law which seeks to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction by managing the trade in strategic goods. While this law specifically focuses on the local implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1540, it likewise touches on important elements of the ATT. Furthermore, a memorandum of agreement on trade facilitation of the exports of strategic goods was signed by the SMO together with the Bureau of Customs, the Philippine Investment Promotion Agencies, and other relevant agencies to ensure security of the supply chain from attempts of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction while guaranteeing ease of doing business and trade, especially for legitimate and compliant companies and exporters. Proposed amendments to the firearms law were submitted to the Legislative Department of the Philippines in order to strengthen the law and to harmonize it with the provisions of the ATT. Relevant Philippine government agencies have also been actively participating in various capacity building activities, webinars, and other related initiatives conducted by the European Union organizations, the US Department of State, our civil society partner, the Nonviolence International Southeast Asia, and many others to strengthen our knowledge and capacities in international arms control. Despite the challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Philippines has been working continuously to bring the country closer to ratifying the ATT. This resulted to the resumption of hearings on the ATT at the Philippine Senate, and we remain hopeful that this series of hearings will conclude with the Philippines ratifying and depositing its instrument of ratification to the UN Secretary General, along with the fact that the Philippines is already doing what states parties to the ATT are doing. Allow me to express and reiterate, Mr. President, our clear and unequivocal commitment to the noble aim of the ATT, and as a signatory state, we are grateful for the opportunity to actively participate in regional and international discussions on the subject, share our national position on important issues in the Conference of States Parties, and join the international community in the promotion of human rights and international law. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, Philippines. I now yield the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea highly appreciates the efforts of the co-chairs of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization to reach out to those outside the ATT, even under these COVID-19 times. We'll welcome new states parties to the ATT, China, Saint Tome and Principe, Afghanistan, and Niue, and the announcement of Gambia to join the ATT. We are delighted to see that 3 of these state parties are from the Asia-Pacific region, where we have the least ATT participants at present. The Republic of Korea, for each part, will continue to work on the universalization efforts in the Asia-Pacific region. As your start, we have completed the project of translating the Treaty Universalization Toolkit and the Welcome Pack into 10 Asian languages last year. We have posted these translated documents on the ATT website with the assistance of the Secretariat, and we hope that all stakeholders will find these useful for their own bilateral and multilateral outreach activities. Taking this opportunity, I would like to share that the Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy has held virtual workshops in commemoration of the Trade and Security Day in July this year to raise awareness on export control and facilitate information exchange among industries and the relevant authorities. In addition, the Korean Defense Acquisition Program Administration will resume its annual International Export Control Conference in Seoul in June 2022 in 2 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we will reach out to participating industries and states as part of our universalization efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much, Republic of Korea. I now yield the floor to our last speaker on the list, ASER, A-S-E-R.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les délégués.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen delegates, we hope you are all well. Mr. President, Action, Security, and Republic and Ethics would like to bring before you the attention between the dynamics of the UN program for eradicate illegal trade in small arms and light weapons. This is essential in its regulation and prevention, as well as the elimination of illicit trade in classical weapons, and to prevent their removal in relation to 6 and 7 of ATC. I'd like to congratulate the Secretariat for the organization of this conference in difficult circumstances and to ensure its financial assistance. Mr. President, ISIS would like to represent here, welcome China as a member of the ATT as universal value of the treaty. We really hope that this can inspire the 2 first exporters, US and Russia, so that they can also integrate into this virtuous and responsible approach in the transfer of weapons, joining the 110 states that are members to the ATT. Mr. President, we know also that ratifying the ATT is not sufficient to ensure its universality. It's a question of applying it, and one of the fundamental conventions on the fundamental rights of freedom, Pacta sunt servanda, in Article 26, any treaty binds the parties and needs to be implemented by them in good faith. This rule binds all states and represents one of the basic principles of the ATT and its universalization. One of the obstacles in the application of common standards, which are referred in Article 1, is that of the legislative incorporation, complete incorporation in legislation, national legislation. This is the case for Canada. The shortcomings of the federal legislation having been recently highlighted in the special report from Amnesty International Canada and the Rideau Institute on exports towards Saudi Arabia with the Yemen war. You can read there the modifications that have been brought to the law on export license. Does not fully include the ATT in Canadian law and does not take into account three obligations of the ATT: the ban in Article 6, exhaustive evaluation of risk Article 7, and also the illegal trade. And this reminds us that the ATT was implemented so that countries can commit themselves to peace, security, and international peace, and the respect of human rights as included in the preamble. Universalization of the ATT can only take place with the application of the universal rights, and there is nothing which is that is impossible, and we hope that you'll be able to move all this forward during the 7th Conference of State Parties.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you. The turnout, we have a final speaker on the list. Poland, kindly take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I didn't take the floor yesterday, but I would like to underline that Poland welcomes the statement of the presidency and fully support initiatives aimed at strengthening efforts to eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons. Regarding universalizations, we are in the position that ATT's universalization requires multi-dimensional approach. These efforts should take into account the specificities of the individual regions and countries, as there is no single strategy that could be effectively applied to all countries being so far outside the treaty. Special attention should be given to states that are signatories of the ATT to encourage them to accelerate their work related to the ratification of the treaty. Priority should also be given to countries that are relevant manufacturers, exporters, and importers of military goods. We welcome the initiative of translating the ATT universalization toolkit and the welcome pack, which was founded by the Republic of Korea. Thank you very much.
I thank you very much, Poland. Thank you. That closes the list of speakers that will take the floor. Thank you all speakers. Thank you very much. In the absence of any other speaker from the floor, let me express my deepest thanks, profound thanks to my co-chair, Ambassador Villegas, for the very hard work and cooperation throughout this process. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I hope we'll continue this beyond our presidency, and there's a lot of work to do, and your experience and expertise and network will be extremely helpful to the next president as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for being with us through this item. We will have to proceed to item number 6, with which we will have started this meeting today. So agenda item 6, which is treaty implementation. Article 17(4)(b) provides that the Conference of States Parties shall consider and adopt recommendations regarding the implementation and operation of this treaty. Delegations will be reminded that treaty implementation is a national responsibility to be carried out by each state party in its own area of jurisdiction within the context of the principles and obligations set out in the treaty. The Third Conference of States Parties established a working group on effective treaty implementation as a platform for sharing experiences, challenges, and practices on the implementation of the treaty at a national level. At this stage, I welcome most heartily the chair of the working group on effective treaty implementation, Ambassador Sam Boen-Lin of the Republic of Korea, to take the floor now and to present the report on the work conducted by his working group in the intersectional period. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to start by thanking the President, Ambassador Gabriel, for the opening remarks and for entrusting me with the responsibility to steer the work of this working group on effective treaty implementation. I would also like to express my deep thanks to the three facilitators on Article 6 and 7, 9 and 11. They conducted, as we know, the sessions in unusual and challenging circumstances because of the COVID-19, and I commend their efforts. I also would like to express my thanks to the participants for their active engagement in the April meeting and consultations of the working group on effective treaty implementation. In terms of the general achievements of the working group this year, in March, state parties were able to agree on and welcome the multi-year work plans for each of the sub-working groups. This will help set the course for the work ahead and paves the way for us to achieve our shared objectives in the context of each sub-working group. I'm going to give a very brief recap of what took place during the meeting of each of the sub-working groups, as well as the next steps for each facilitator. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 6 and 7, facilitated by Ambassador Sanchez of Spain, the facilitator provided a brief presentations of the findings of his report on the methodology exercise for the exchange of national practices and interpretation of some key concepts in Article 6 and 7 in compliance with the mandate of the Conference of State Parties. The report confirms that the conceptual underpinnings of national practices analyzed were generally similar except for national nuances and variations. The facilitator emphasized that the aim of the exercise was to promote exchange of national practices and was not to prescribe or agree on a single interpretation of key concepts, nor to create new norms and standards. During the open debate, delegations considered positively the outcome of the exercise, especially the fact that it does not establish new obligations or prescriptions. The views exchanged during the debate will help inform the next steps taken by the facilitator as he begins his work on a list of possible draft elements for Chapter 1, key concepts of the proposed voluntary guide to assist state parties in implementing Article 6 and 7. He will present this draft at the first meeting of the sub-working group in the CSP7 cycle. Thereafter, the sub-working group will commence focused discussions on Article 6 obligations as contemplated in the multi-year plan. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 9, facilitated by Mr. Rob Wensley of South Africa, the second meeting of this relatively new sub-working group began the substantive work of the group and focused on two preliminary topics. a discussion on national approaches to the terms transit and transshipment, and a discussion on the phrases under its jurisdiction and through its territory in accordance with international law. During the meeting, participants received expert presentations on both topics. In the discussions that followed, the facilitator emphasized the importance of sharing information on national practices in order that state parties may draw on what they perceive to be common practices. He also emphasized that his focus for the sub-working group is to see where the group can reach common understandings on the terms contained in Article 9. He raised the possibility of exploring the development of a compendium of national practice and or voluntary guide in the context of the UGETI sub-working group on Article 9 to support implementation of this article, whilst noting that this may be an easier task in the context of the second topic compared to the first one. Moving forward, the facilitator will begin preparations for a more in-depth look at measures to regulate the transit and transshipment of arms by land, which will be the focus of the next meeting of the sub-working group in the CSP8 cycle. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 11, facilitated by Ms. Stella Petrovic of Serbia, the meeting began with an overview by the facilitator of a whole draft paper outlining elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion, based on discussion that took place during the meeting of sub-working group in February 2020. Following a discussion of the facilitator's paper, participants continued to explore the practicalities associated with assessing the risk of diversion of an export and the possible establishment of mitigation measures. Participants were invited to examine a series of questions aimed at exploring state practice with respect to assessing the risk of diversion and information exchange mechanisms. Finally, they welcomed the newly created Diversion Information Exchange Forum and noted the need for meaningful engagement in this forum. Following the sub-working group's discussions in April, the facilitator prepared and circulated to ATT stakeholders a draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion for consultation remotely during the international period. The draft paper incorporating input received during the remote consultation is being presented to CSP7 for consideration and endorsement, and forms Annex A to my draft report to CSP7. My recommendation is that the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion, prepared by the facilitator of the sub-working group on Article 11, be endorsed by CSP7 as a living document of a voluntary nature, to be reviewed and updated regularly by the working group as appropriate. With that, I thank you all once again for your contributions and suggestions to our discussions. And I look forward to further progress being made on this important issue of treaty implementation in the next CSP cycle. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much, Excellency. Thank the Republic of Korea, as assisted by Spain, South Africa, and Serbia for the very good work in this working group. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, at this stage, I would like to invite Ambassador Villegas again to take the floor at this time to make a brief introduction of the recommendations of the working paper submitted by Argentina. After that, the floor will be open to speakers. We have a long list of speakers who will respond to the presentation on the working group, as well as on Ambassador Villegas' paper. Thank you very much, and welcome to the podium, Ambassador Villegas. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, again, and thank you to my distinguished colleague for his report. I'm glad to see you all in this last session about the working paper presented by Argentina as president of the CSP6 in 2020, titled Transparency and Exchange of Information, its role in the prevention of diversion. As you all know, this working paper was presented for the first time on April 2020, but it was not adopted due to also the special circumstances of our CSP6, that, as you know, a set of decisions because of the silent procedure were not adopted, but others were adopted, like the diversion forum. In this case, this paper, there were, in the silent procedure, there were two state parties that broke the silence procedure, and therefore the CSP7 president on November 2020 circulated an announcement regarding the approach to resolve this paper, this draft decision adopting this paper that were not approved. In the case of this decision 17, regarding the working paper of the presidency of CSP6, we agreed on continuing with the consultation process in order to achieve consensus on this draft. This process included bilateral consultations with those delegations that broke the silence at that time on decision 17. We made presentations of this working paper at the various CSP7 preparatory meetings and garnered the necessary support for its adoption. Since then, Argentina called several informal meetings with all the interested parties, and as a consequence, this draft was amended many times, taking into consideration the comments of all the delegations and stakeholders. On July 6, we circulated through the Secretariat a final version, Rev 4, of this working paper. This is a version that takes into consideration the comments we received during our formal consultations in April during the CSP7 preparatory meetings, and also during our two informal rounds of consultations at the end of June during the intersessional period with all the ATT stakeholders. As you all know, this working paper contains 8 recommendations to the CSP promoting transparency and exchange of information measures in order to prevent diversion. The aim of my delegation, after submitting this document for the first time 16 months ago, and after the several rounds of consultations, is to obtain the necessary consensus for the adoption of this document by the CSP7, as it is indicated in the CSP7 agenda. Therefore, this, if you allow me, Mr. President, is the purpose of my presentation. And since one of the decisions that was adopted in the last conference is related to the diversion forum, it's important, we think, that we settle this exchange transparency paper of the presidency of last year, because it will be important to give us a framework for the work of our ATT in the near future. Thank you very much. And I don't know, I'm in your hands if we open the floor for comments on this specific proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. We do have a list of speakers already, and we would like to close the speaker, and speakers will indicate what they. Oh, somebody wants to say something. So we will open the floor to delegates. based upon the list that we already have, and each speaker taking the floor will indicate what their comments will be directed. So you've listened to two very important presentations, the one from the working group from the ambassador of Korea, and now on the paper, which has been a pending paper since the last conference, and which contains important points from Ambassador Villegas. Ladies and gentlemen, now I'll begin. I have this list. I'll call out for a start five names in that order. In Canada, Switzerland, European Union, France, Republic of Korea. Canada, you have the floor. And kindly indicate what the direction of the conversation is and your presentation. Thank you.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Tout d'abord, notre délégation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, our delegation would like to congratulate you on the assumption of the presidency of the 7th Conference of States Parties. Please be assured of our full support throughout this meeting. We would also like to congratulate the presidency of CSP7 and also the presidency for the effective implementation of the treaty. First of all, as states are invited to exchange views relating to the implementation of the ATT, we would like to indicate what Canada has done in the context of the implementation of the treaty. Following our accession to the treaty in 2019, in addition to submitting its initial report and its annual report, as per Article 13, Canada also published its annual national report entitled Report on Exports of Military Goods from Canada. We are legally required to table this report in our Parliament by May 31st every year. We wish to note that for the year 2020, Canada denied 5 permit applications, further to a substantial risk assessment, which is the Canadian equivalent for overriding risk. The proposed exports were denied because our Minister of Foreign Affairs determined that there was a substantial risk that these exports would result in one or more of the negative consequences as specified in Articles 7.1 and 7.4 of the treaty, and that this risk could not be sufficiently mitigated. More specifically, these denials were made on the grounds of a substantial risk of serious violation of IHL, serious violation of international human rights law, or serious acts of gender-based violence. More information can be found on the website of the Canadian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Global Affairs Canada. We would like to draw the delegates' attention to the chat function of the conference's online platform, where we have posted the link to this report. Mr. Chairman, in addition to the national measures in place to implement the treaty domestically, Canada continues to support initiatives that strengthen general treaty implementation. For instance, Canada has recently partnered with the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR is its acronym, with a funding of 300,000 Canadian dollars to support the Gender and Disarmament program over the next 3 years. The expected outcomes for this partnership include improving current practices related to gender analysis and the use of gender disaggregated data in conventional arms control and disarmament processes, as well as developing a more diversified group of players supporting the integration of gender considerations into arms control and disarmament policy in practice, including weapons and ammunition management. I will continue in English, if I may. Monsieur le Président, nous aimerions vous parler d'un document portant sur les mesures de vérification porte-livraison que nous préparons actuellement et que nous avons mentionné.
To gather different perspectives in the Arms Trade Treaty context. The paper is intended to be neutral in presenting its findings in order to stimulate discussion rather than champion a particular view. We thank the Secretariat, which has kindly circulated Canada's questionnaire on post-delivery verification measures in May, to allow us to compile the different views from states parties and other stakeholders into the working paper. We recognize that the consultation timeframe was short, particularly in the context of COVID-19. We are nonetheless pleased to report that a number of states parties and civil society organizations already responded, and we wish to thank them for their contribution. In order to produce a better and more representative document, at this stage, we believe that it still behooves us to seek broader input. Accordingly, we invite all states parties and other stakeholders that have not yet had the opportunity to do so to complete and return the questionnaire or to reach out to us to obtain a copy of the questionnaire. Our intent will be to present the working paper at a future Arms Trade Treaty meeting with a view to encouraging further dialogue on this topic. I thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, Canada. Thank you. Next on my list, Switzerland.
Mr. President, Mr. Chair, let me start with some comments to the Chair's report of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation. First of all, I would like to express Switzerland's gratitude for your much appreciated work in light of the unfavorable circumstances related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It allowed us to make good progress in the working group. The helpful presentations and the distributed documents also supported this progress. With regard to the subgroup on Articles 6 and 7, Switzerland welcomed the exchange of information on the concepts of serious violations of international humanitarian law and serious violations of international human rights law. A common understanding of these provisions is crucial for a correct and uniform implementation of the ATT. At the same time, it is important to continue to ensure that our work does not lead to a reinterpretation of existing international definitions, for instance, those regarding international crimes. With that in mind, Switzerland supports the further development of a voluntary guide also with regard to the concepts of serious violations of international humanitarian law and serious violations of international human rights law. Having said this, the voluntary guide could refer to other instruments that already define this concept. Regarding the implementation of Article 9, we appreciate having had the opportunity to discuss the terms transit and transshipment on the one hand, under its jurisdiction and through its territory on the other hand. In addition, the expert presentations on the interpretation of these terms under international law were very helpful. We welcome that the facilitator of the sub-working group will begin preparations for a more in-depth look at the measures to regulate the transit and transshipment of arms by land. Furthermore, Switzerland supports the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion put forward by the facilitator of the sub-working group of Article 11. It is useful to have such a document available because it contains the most important elements for a careful and thorough examination of export applications in order to minimize the risk of an unauthorized arms transfer. Therefore, we welcome its posting on the ATT website, and we are looking forward to continue this fruitful work next year when we tackle the next topics within the multi-year work plan. Switzerland will take a special interest in the discussion of the transfer chain stage 3 about post-delivery cooperation. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, let me now continue with some comments to the working paper presented by Argentina. We thank Argentina for reintroducing this paper on the role of transparency and information exchange for the prevention of diversion. Transparency and information exchange are key to prevent diversion of arms. This can only be achieved with a close cooperation amongst the ATT stakeholders. At this current time, state parties are working to create the instruments necessary to make an efficient cooperation amongst ATT stakeholders possible. The Diversion Information Exchange Forum is one of those instruments. The list of national point of contacts is another means for that purpose. Lastly, different forms of post-delivery cooperation can become vital tools to preventing diversion. We therefore support the paper's encouragement that are recommended for approval by the CSP. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, and Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Switzerland. Thank you. Next on my list, European Union.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries of the Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Albania, the country of the Stabilization and Association Process and potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the EFTA countries Iceland, Norway, members of the European Economic Area, as well as Georgia, align themselves with this statement. The EU underlines the essential contribution that the responsible arms trade policy makes to the maintenance of international peace and security and respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. Since the adoption of the EU common position on arms exports in 2008, EU member states are legally bound to assess license applications for the export of conventional arms against 8 criteria. These criteria are in line with the Arms Trade Treaty. EU member states deny licenses whenever there's a clear risk that the export of military technology and equipment might be used for internal repression, contribute to regional instability, or violate international human rights or humanitarian law. The ATT is the first arms regulation treaty to recognize the link between conventional arms transfers and gender-based violence, mandating that gender-based violence be considered in the course of export risk assessments. Its effective implementation can contribute to eliminating violence against women and girls, as set out in Sustainable Development Goal Target 5.2. Following the review of the EU common position on arms exports 2 years ago, the EU and its member states are currently implementing several concrete follow-up initiatives. A searchable online database is now available on the website of the European External Action Service that allows all stakeholders to consult and analyze the data on member states' arms exports in a user-friendly manner. The EU now also has a uniform approach to the export of small arms and light weapons and their ammunition. This approach was formalized by a decision of earlier this year, establishing a set of common features to which end-user certificates for the export of small arms and light weapons must conform. The aim of this decision is to prevent the diversion of arms to illicit or unintended users, to create a level playing field, and to increase clarity for the defense industry and its clients regarding relevant requirements. Finally, the EU is working on a database for licensing officers from member states that will contain relevant information on destination countries to be used in the licensing decision-making process. The EU Common Military List, based on the control list of the Wassenaar Arrangement and usually updated on an annual basis, is an important tool to clarify and decide whether a license obligation exists for a specific equipment or technology. The EU Common Military List can be considered a specification of the scope of the treaty as defined in Articles 2, 3, and 4 of the ATT. In that sense, it can serve as a relevant practical reference tool for states outside the EU as well. Finally, implementation is a national responsibility. Therefore, any assistance that can be provided to states in this regard is both valuable and useful. In this context, the EU will continue its ambitious implementation project on the promotion of effective arms export controls implemented by BAFA and Expertise France. This project has been instrumental in advancing the implementation of the ATT outside the European Union, in particular in the establishment of national control systems and national control lists, drafting and reviewing of the legislative and regulatory framework, prevention of diversion, and in the reinforcement of customs and law enforcement. In the future, this project will particularly focus on assisting non-states parties and signatories to prepare for accession to the treaty. Thank you, Mr. President, and apologies for being long, but I do have the opportunity to speak on behalf of 27 states, so I hope that takes away a bit of the blame. Thanks.
It certainly does. I must add those going forward for the next speakers that we are not doing very well with time, and we don't want to have a backlog of items that we would not be able to exhaust through the week. So kindly, let's make the greatest possible effort to speak within 2 minutes. I have France next on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. France agrees fully with what has been said by the European Union, but in its national capacity has a few observations to make. First of all, we would like to thank the ambassador of South Korea, Mr. Lim, for his leadership, enlightened leadership at the head of this group, and his very comprehensive report that he presented very clearly. We would also like to thank the facilitators of the sub-working groups, especially in the intersessional period, for all of their efforts. France would like to express its gratitude to the ambassador of Spain, Mr. Sanchez de la Reina, facilitator of the subgroup on Articles 6 and 7, for his involvement in the work that were done under his leadership. We would like to recall our support for the objective to create a panorama of national practices, a landscape, and to identify possible solutions, to find possible solutions in this area. But having heard the presentation of the report regarding the effective implementation of the treaty, that in line with the letter and spirit of the treaty, that the objective is not to impose a unique interpretation of these various concepts, and we understand as a result that the opportunity to prepare a guide on the implementation of Articles 6 and 7 is something that can only be done on a voluntary basis. France supports the recommendations of the group on the implementation of the ATT, and notably as regards endorsing Annex A, the elements that have to be taken into consideration when assessing diversion risks. In our understanding, these are recommendations without a compulsory nature that states parties may adopt if they wish in compliance with the national legislation. This is a key aspect. These recommendations are no substitute for predefined national legislative framework pursuant to the treaty. And this is the case of para 4 of Annex 4, to maintain a database with the name of contacts of those who are allowed to sign authorizations is something that has to be done pursuant to national legislation. I thank you, Mr. President, and I would like once again to express the gratitude of France for the work done by the rapporteurs and the facilitators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that was superb, France. Thank you. Republic of Korea, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea recognizes the achievements of the work undertaken by the sub-working groups through the virtual meetings in April and informal consultations in June this year. We'll look forward to a list of possible draft elements for Chapter 1 key concepts of the voluntary guide to assist state parties in implementing Articles 6 and 7, which the facilitator, the Ambassador of Spain, will present next year on the basis of the results of the methodology template exercise. In addition, the Republic of Korea supports the voluntary paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion. As we consider this document to be another helpful reference for state parties in implementing the ATT, we hope the other state parties will support it as well. In particular, as the authentication of export documents is crucial to the prevention of diversion, the Republic of Korea hopes that we can further our discussions in the next working group meetings on the exchange of information related to end-user certificates, such as their templates, track recording, and the issuing authorities on the ATT platform. Lastly, the Republic of Korea once again welcomes the establishment of the Divergent Information Exchange Forum, a significant achievement of the CSP6. We are very grateful for Argentina's continuous efforts to promote transparency and exchange of information, and support the recommendations in the working paper presented by Argentina. I thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, Republic of Korea. Next on my list is Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, Belgium wants to commend the chair of the working group and the Article 11 subgroup facilitator on preparing a comprehensive draft paper on the diversion risk assessment process. As we indicated in our written submission during the remote consultations, we are generally satisfied with the structure of the document and the pertinent to-the-point elements that are included. Furthermore, we are pleased to see that most of the comments and suggestions that we submitted are reflected in the present document. As the current chair of the ATT Diversion Information Exchange Forum, we also appreciate reference to the forum and to the potential use of the information shared in the forum as a source for states' own diversion risk assessments. It's important that sharing operational information about diversion in the forum and using that information in line with the terms of reference becomes part of states' parties and signatories' standard procedures. Even though in April we indicated that the conference should rather welcome the draft paper than formally adopt it, as was done with the other guidance document at CSP4, there are possible measures to prevent and address diversion and the list of possible reference documents to be considered by states parties to prevent and address diversion. We are ready now to accept its endorsement as a living document of a voluntary nature if other states parties agree with this. More generally, nonetheless, we need to be attentive that we create a coherent body of guidance documents and that we streamline our approach to such documents. One final comment on the draft paper concerns a very small typing error that we identified, and that is in the last section of the introduction where there is a superfluous S at the end of a living documents. So the S should go. Mr. President, it wasn't part of our prepared statement, but as the DEEF chair, I do want to reiterate once again our support also to the Argentinian working paper. We appreciate very much the acknowledgement by Argentina of the important role that the forum could play in preventing and addressing cases of diversion. We therefore support not only support the working paper, we are very grateful also for the role that Argentina played in the establishment of the DEEF last year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Belgium. Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, let me just confirm that the list of the speakers list is now closed. It will end with Bulgaria. The next speaker on my list is Mexico. Mexico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. En nombre de la Delegación de México, deseo agradecer a usted y a los facilitadores del grupo por el informe que nos han presentado y por alentar.
You have to, we are not hearing you in Mexico. I think you need to get the audio on.
Can you hear me, Mr. President? Can you hear me, Mr. President?
I'm afraid Mexico, your audio is off, and you know it happens a lot of times, and you just need to touch a little button in some place, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Since we can't connect with Mexico, we'll have to move on. We'll come back to you, Mexico, once the small technical glitch is taken care of. Finland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by thanking you, President, for all the work you have done in preparation of this conference in difficult circumstances. And we are very happy to meet now in hybrid form. I wish to align myself to the statement of European Union and add some remarks on my national capacity. Illicit flows of arms and conventional weapons is one of the great challenges that we face today. Civilians, including women and children, are increasingly targeted. Finland attaches great importance to the humanitarian dimension of the Arms Trade Treaty. However, the consequences of uncontrolled flows on conventional arms go far beyond the immediate human impact of violence. It also seriously hampers any attempts for economic and social development and growth. We welcome, Presidency, your thematic focus on trade in small arms and light weapons and their effective stockpile management. The topic is closely linked to the key objectives of the ATT, especially to Article 11, where all state parties commit to take measures to prevent diversion. The effective stockpile management is vital when combating illicit transfer of small arms and light weapons. We need to explore further synergies between the ATT and other institutions, programs, and financial instruments. We hope that this CSP7 gives clear guidance to further discussions on this issue. Let me highlight briefly the priorities of Finland shortly. Actually, Finland adopted in March this year government strategy on Africa that specifies our bilateral and multilateral objectives and points out the need to support all efforts to combat the proliferation of small arms and conventional weapons in Africa. During the Finnish ATT presidency in 2016 and 17, we organized a thematic discussion on arms trade and development that highlighted many links between the treaty and the 2030 Agenda for Development, especially Goal 16.4 on illicit transfer. The outcome of that thematic discussion that took place in CSP3 is still very relevant. Just a few more points. Firstly, transparency and reporting is a vital part of ATT implementation. And I take it up because I do not speak anymore when reporting is on the agenda. And key to confidence building. We regret that some participant states have failed to report. I would like to use this opportunity to inform you that Finland included in 2020 ATT annual report a voluntary annex on export data covering all categories of the EU military list. This annex is comprehensive and based on real export data. Second, the ATT is the first arms regulation treaty that recognizes the links between transfer of arms and gender-based violence. We emphasize the importance of mainstreaming gender into practical and technical small arms control activities and programs. In conclusion, let me express my support to the recommendations of the working group on effective treaty implementation. Thank you, Chair.
I thank you very much, Finland, and I thank you for the announcement of support to Africa on small arms and light weapons. I'll yield the floor again to Mexico, and I'm hoping that the small glitch has been fixed. Mexico, you have the chance now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have been reported by some delegations that they can hear me. I just want to confirm that you hear me well, Ambassador?
Absolutely, loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for the flexibility to give me the floor again. En nombre de la delegación de México, agradezco.
In name of Mexico, I'd like to thank you and the facilitators of the working group for the report you have submitted to us and for encouraging all parties to continue implementing all of the articles of the treaty, namely those linked to the main theme of this conference, that is strengthening the efforts to eradicate illicit trade of souls and to ensure an efficient stockpile management. In the last cycle, we have taken national, bilateral, and regional measures to continue advancing on the implementation of the regime of the treaty. Interinstitutional coordination is key for the success of these measures. That is why Mexico, despite the pandemic, has continued meeting with an interinstitutional working group. In order to comply with Article 12 of the treaty, we have developed a criminal registry for weapons. The aim is to continue the history, the life cycle of the firearm, from the production to its sale, use, and a final disposal or destruction thereof. This is a reference model for the market. This registry allows to understand what happens with the firearm, both in the illicit as well as the licit market. And it helps us to identify those spaces available that have facilitated diversion of the firearms and commission of possible crimes. Mexico has signed commitments of verification of post-commercialization. We can do this remotely, despite the logistic difficulties that COVID-19 has imposed on all of us. With regards to Article 15 of the treaty, Mexico reaffirms that international cooperation and transparency are key to promote trust among states. We believe that this article needs to be the starting point for information exchange once illicit transfers of weapons has occurred. These commitments are also important for the alliances established with other foreign organizations. We'd like to thank Argentina for its report on transparency and information exchange to avoid diversion, and we support the recommendations included in this report. Lastly, we'd like to acknowledge that the implementation of the treaty can be reinforced through the support of different stakeholders like international organizations or organizations from civil society or the academic world. In this sense, we'd like to thank these different sectors for the support. The project of the EU for EU P2P control program is a good example of what can be done to accompany states in a full and effective implementation of the treaty. Mexico is an active participant of this project. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the occasion of addressing this meeting.
Thank you, Mexico. United Kingdom, you have the floor, please.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. The UK would like to thank Argentina for their work in considering the importance of transparency and the exchange of information in preventing diversion. We've been pleased to work on the paper with partners and consider that we now have a set of robust, practical and implementable recommendations which will guide our future efforts. We consider that the Diversion Information Exchange Forum is an important step in enabling frank and transparent exchange of information and views in a confidential setting. Given the sensitivity of discussions, we support the proposal that the first session of the forum be put on hold until conditions allow for an in-person meeting. Finally, we welcome the discussions that we've had in the working group on effective treaty implementation, which have involved a wide range of views. We support the proposal for the CSP to endorse the draft paper outlining elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion. We consider that the voluntary nature of the document strikes the right balance between providing helpful and useful information while avoiding the creation of additional and over-prescriptive burdens for member states. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Ireland is next on my list. Ireland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ireland aligns itself with the statements delivered by the European Union and would like to add the following remarks in a national capacity. At the outset, I would like to thank the Chair of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation and the facilitators of its sub-working groups on Articles 6 and 7, Article 9 and Article 11. We would like to register our appreciation for the professionalism and extensive preparations that you've put into the working group meetings over the last year. Your efforts have enabled us to continue this important work with only minimal disruption. Ireland supports the conclusions and recommendations as contained in the WGETI Chair's draft report to the CSP. The implementation of the ATT is a national responsibility which is embedded in the framework of national control systems. We strongly support the voluntary paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion as a practical document which can tangibly improve treaty implementation. The paper sets out clearly and concisely the fundamental elements that a national transfer system should have in place. My delegation believes it will prove immensely useful to states seeking to establish or develop upon existing risk assessments. We regret that the first meeting for the Diversion Information Exchange Forum has not taken place yet due to the ongoing public health situation. We look forward to engaging in the forum, which is well placed to become a key mechanism for states to share critical intelligence related to illicit arms and combat weapons diversion. President, all states start from different points when implementing the ATT, with different legal and administrative arrangements and levels of capacity. As such, a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate. Regular information exchange on policies and best practices is key to ensure effective and harmonious treaty implementation. Over the last year, Ireland has been pleased to speak on several occasions, on several outreach panels and support projects designed to identify gaps and improve policy implementation in the areas of ammunition management, gender and diversion. Our work has included supporting 2 papers by the Stimson Centre, the first on diversion and the second on gender-based violence risk assessments. Each of these papers provides key background and guidance questionnaire to states. These questionnaires were designed to be accessible to all states parties and to standardise practice when assessing risks in a way that is practical to facilitating effective processing of licensing applications. To conclude, Mr. President, the effective implementation of the ATT is a key step in preventing the illicit and irresponsible transfer of arms, which continue to contribute to conflict, instability and violence. It promotes accountability and transparency in the international arms trade. Universal application and full implementation of the ATT will enhance international security, reduce violence in both conflict and non-conflict settings, and can bring us closer to achieving the goals of the 2030 Agenda. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I thank you, Arlen. China, you have the floor, please.
Mr. President, as a state party to the ATT, China attaches great importance to and is steadily promoting the implementation of the ATT. First, China adheres to and keeps improving its military export principles, laws, and regulations to ensure compliance with ATT obligations. China will continue to strictly follow the strict principles, namely conducive to legitimate self-defense capacities of recipient country, not undermine peace, security, stability of the region concerned and the world as a whole. Third, no interference in the internal affairs of the recipient country. China will continue to strictly follow a series of domestic laws and regulations, including the law on the administration of firearms, the regulation on administration of military products exports, and military products export control list. In October 2020, China promulgated the export control law, which further strengthened the legislative system of export control, including military products. Second, China faithfully fulfills its international commitments and strictly abides by relevant UN Security Council resolutions on arms embargo. Third, China will continue to conduct arms trade with sovereign countries only and requires the end user and end use certificates from the recipient governments, with commitments not to transfer the arms imported from China to any third party without prior consent of the Chinese government. Moreover, China does not permit arms export to non-state actors. Fourth, China will submit its initial report and annual report in accordance with the provision of ATT on time. Fifth, China is ready to enhance exchanges and cooperation with all state parties with a view to promoting the authority and effectiveness of the treaty, which is displaying Chinese responsibility and commitment to the treaty. Mr. President, China believes that transit and transshipment are important links in preventing illegal transfer and misuse of conventional arms, agrees that all state parties should strengthen regulation and fully engage customs in this area of work, as well as actively carry out information exchange and law enforcement cooperation. China has noted that some countries still need to improve their regulatory capacity for transit and transshipment. We hope that relevant state parties will make efforts in legislation and law enforcement, strengthen the supervision of transit and transshipment, and prevent illegal exports and transfer of weapons. China is willing to share its experience and practices and provide necessary assistance to countries in need. Diversion is related to issues such as the control system and the practices of importing countries. Despite exporting countries' stringent examination, the risk still exists. This is a common challenge faced by all countries and requires concerted efforts to strengthen coordination and cooperation so as to jointly tackle it. China proposes that exporting countries should strengthen assessment and inspection to prevent the risk of diversion. Importing countries should fulfill their commitments, strengthen diversion supervision, and assume the main responsibility of preventing illicit diversion. At the same time, we should also strengthen information and communication exchange and cooperate to address potential risks of diversion. China believes that the working paper on elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion should fully consider different countries' national contexts so as to ensure that all parties work on a voluntary basis. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much, China. Thank you. Next on my list is Namibia. Excellency, Ambassador Julia Imedi Chanduru, you have the floor, please.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. President. We wish to thank Ambassador Lim of the Republic of Korea as chair of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation, as well as the facilitators of the sub-working groups for the excellent work done and the exchange of information and the identification of treaty implementation priority areas for endorsement by the CSP. Furthermore, we wish to thank Argentina for the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion and are pleased to welcome the document. On implementation in Namibia, as stated yesterday, Namibia became a state party on the 28th of April 2020. As such, we're still in infancy when it comes to the work of the ATT. Namibia is aware, however, that implementation is the heart of the ATT. It is in this regard that Namibia applied to the ATT Voluntary Trust Fund to help build capacity for the implementation project of the ATT. The project will ensure effective implementation of the ATT in Namibia and the review of the legal framework for regulating arms transfer in Namibia. By engaging the experts of Control Arms and its partners to work alongside the Namibian government and national stakeholders responsible for the implementation of the ATT, Namibia gains expertise and tools to establish and govern a competent national authority that will implement the ATT. Mr. President, the ATT VTF is a very important tool for the implementation of the ATT. It lays the foundation for new state parties to commence the actual work of implementing the spirit and letter of the treaty, as well as domesticating the provisions of the ATT into national laws. Namibia urges the ATT VTF that the ATT VTF is sustained for years to come to ensure that new state parties acquire the necessary expertise in implementing the ATT. In conclusion, Mr. President, allow me to share as well that Namibia is committed to fulfilling its financial obligations to the ATT. I thank you.
I thank you. Nice, great commitment. Thank you very much. We have Piero now on the speaker's list. Piero, take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Peru recognizes and appreciates the work carried out by Korea and by the three facilitators from South Africa, Spain, and Serbia. Given the lack of time this afternoon, we'd only like to submit our comments with regards to the document of Argentina on transparency and exchange of information, which they submitted as chairs of the CSP6 in 2020. We'd like to thank them for the document and for their conclusions and recommendations. Diversion is or should be a priority for state parties. Two chairmanships, Argentina and Japan, have focused on this theme during their presidencies, and a sub-working group on Article 11 and a forum for the exchange of information on diversion have been created to demonstrate the importance assigned to this theme. We believe it is important to encourage exchange of information at a bilateral, sub-regional, and national level. Peru has bilateral mechanisms with Bolivia, Colombia, Chile, and Ecuador to exchange information, good practices, and border cooperation to fight against the illicit trade of weapons and munitions. We believe that exchange of information is a key factor to identify measures to avoid or minimize diversion. We will continue contributing to the meetings of the Forum for Information Exchange on Diversion and in the working group for Article 11. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. New Zealand, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This statement relates to the working group rather than the working paper, although we do also support the latter. Aotearoa New Zealand welcomes the excellent work of the Chair and facilitators on the working group on effective treaty implementation and its sub-working groups. Our treaty sets strong standards. It prohibits certain transfers, provides for export-related assessments, seeks to reduce the security of the risk of transit and transshipment, and prevents diversion. In realising its objectives and in ensuring its ongoing credibility, we must all meet the treaty's standards. In this regard, we welcome the previous President's paper on elements for a process for assessing the risk of diversion. As some of you may know, New Zealand has recently conducted a review of its export control system, reflecting public and political interest in our export assessment process. Recognising that transparency is critical to the success of our treaty, we look forward to sharing the results of that review and the lessons we have learned from it with the ATT community in the near future. For some states, we know that cooperation and assistance will be essential for implementing the ATT effectively. New Zealand has had the privilege of acting as chair of the selection committee for the Voluntary Trust Fund since late 2019. This year, the selection held its annual meeting virtually in May and approved 13 projects from 21 applications, all aimed at improving ATT implementation. In our capacity as VTF chair, we have recently released 3 videos providing guidance on the application process, all of which are available on the VTF website, and we have a further video coming soon. In June, New Zealand made a national contribution of $100,000 to the fund. We thank all of those who have contributed to and applied for VTF support and encourage all ATT stakeholders to explore all possible avenues for promoting and supporting this fund. Finally, New Zealand would like to recognise the tireless role of the non-governmental representatives that continue to play a crucial role in ensuring the success of our treaty. The role of civil society in raising the awareness of the ATT's aims and in supporting its implementation cannot be understated. New Zealand looks forward to continuing to work with all ATT stakeholders in our common pursuit for better prospects for international and regional peace, security and stability, and for the reduction of human suffering through our commitment to a more responsible international trade in conventional arms.
Thank you, New Zealand. I will have to yield the floor to the State of Palestine. They had asked to speak, but we are added on the list only now. The State of Palestine, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, the State of Palestine would like to extend its deep gratitude to you, as well as the chair of CSP6, for leading our efforts in a transparent, constructive, and effective manner, including during the preparatory process for the 7th Conference of States Parties. We also thank the Secretariat, the working group chairs, and the subgroup facilitators for all their efforts in ensuring the success of this dialogue. Under the treaty implementation item, allow me to first express our support for the work of the Standing Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation and our appreciation to His Excellency Ambassador Lim of the Republic of Korea as chair of the group for the period between CSP6 and CSP7. Mr. President, the State of Palestine is neither a manufacturer nor large importer of conventional weapons. And in spite of the difficulties that our people are subjected to as a result of Israel's illegal colonial occupation of our territory, we are determined to implement our obligations and to uphold our responsibilities under the ATT, including reporting and financial obligations. This unwavering commitment is born out of our deep conviction that a rules-based international order led by multilateralism is necessary for ensuring freedom, justice, and peace for all. In this regard, the State of Palestine, along with 20 other state parties, participated actively in the methodology exercise for the exchange of national practices and interpretation of some key concepts in Articles 6 and 7. We look forward to taking part in other similar exercises aimed at promoting the exchange of national practices. In addition, we welcome the endorsement of the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion as a living document of a voluntary nature to be reviewed and updated regularly by the working group as appropriate. Mr. President, in closing, we would like to remind all participants that the State of Palestine is holding a side event at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon, which will inter alia tackle the need for effective implementation and universalization of the ATT in the MENA region. The Zoom link is available on the ATT website, and we look forward to your participation. I thank you.
Thank you, State of Palestine. Next on my list is Japan.
Japan would like to begin by expressing its sincere appreciation to the chair of the working group on effective treaty implementations and all facilitators of the sub-working groups for your leadership. We also appreciate Ambassador Villegas for your dedication and efforts to finalize the working paper on transparency and exchange of the information through extensive informal consultations throughout the CSP7 cycle. Japan is happy with the language on the final version of the working paper by Argentina, and we also support the annex of the chair's draft report on the elements of the process for addressing the risk of diversion as a living document and voluntary nature. Japan recognized the vital importance of the working groups on effective treaty implementation as a forum for discussion to promote and enhance the implementation of the ATT. We welcome the clarification in the chair's draft report on the purpose of the exercise conducted under the sub-working group on Articles 6 and 7, stating that I quote, it was to promote the exchange of the national practices and was not intended to prescribe, create new norms and standards or establish an agreement on a single interpretation of the key concepts. We also appreciate the opportunities to listen to the views of the legal experts on general interpretations of some of the key concepts in the April meeting. It is important for each state to benefit from their expertise and advice to enhance the implementation of the ATT in accordance with their domestic situation and law systems. Mr. Chair, as previously expressed, Japan believes that we should be cautious of any efforts that could risk establishing new norms and possible implications on the interpretations of the other international legal instruments. When we consider and unpack the key concepts which are not defined in the treaty, it is inevitable to face the issue of interpretations, which would not be something that can be easily agreed on by consensus. And in particular, written interpretation may have the serious legal implications on the other frameworks. With these issues in mind, Japan believes that we should take a cautious approach when we continue discussion next year on a list of the possible draft elements for Chapter 1, key concepts of the proposed voluntary guide for assisting the implementation of Articles 6 and 7, and careful consideration should be given in our future work. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Japan. ICRC, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will deliver abridged remarks pertaining to treaty implementation. The International Committee of the Red Cross expresses its appreciation to the chair of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation and to the facilitators of its sub-working groups. At the heart of the Arms Trade Treaty are the prohibitions spelled out in its Articles 6 and 7 and the requirement to assess the risk that a proposed export of conventional arms, ammunition, or parts and components could be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law, IHL, or human rights law. An export must not be authorized if there is a clear or overriding risk. The faithful implementation of these provisions is critical to preventing war crimes and other serious violations of international law. Exchanges in the sub-working group on Articles 6 and 7 have been useful in bringing out that key concepts such as that of serious violation of international humanitarian law are well-established notions, and there is widespread agreement on their meaning. In spite of this, whether the ATT's humanitarian purpose of reducing human suffering is realized depends on how states parties give effect to its provisions in practice. Yesterday, the ICRC's vice president spoke of the increasingly protracted nature of contemporary armed conflicts fueled by the inflow of weapons, and of the risk of diffusion of responsibility resulting from the multiplication of actors that support warring parties, including by supplying them with arms. The humanitarian consequences can be devastating. The ICRC calls on states that support warring parties to take practical steps to reduce the human cost of war. States supplying the means by which wars are fought bear a special duty in this regard. Our report, Allies, Partners and Proxies, published in April, proposes guiding questions for decision makers to strengthen their analysis of the humanitarian risks and concrete steps that involved actors should take to mitigate these risks. We are looking forward to exploring some of these aspects in our side event tomorrow. The ICRC remains concerned that all too often there is apparent tension between the legal obligations of states under the ATT and their duty to ensure respect for IHL on the one hand and actual arms transfer practice on the other. The ICRC commends states that have openly shared information on their arms transfer practices. We encourage all stakeholders to utilize forthcoming sub-working group meetings to explore in more depth what practical measures states take to fulfill their obligations relating to transit and transshipment, how they assess and mitigate the risks relating to arms export and diversion, and what challenges they encounter. The ATT can only deliver on its promise if common challenges in implementation are duly recognized and states parties find ways to overcome them. Within the limits of our mandate and expertise, the ICRC stands ready to support these efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, ICRC. Next, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Both would like to thank the different inputs and presentations delivered by different experts and states in the context of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation and its 3 subgroups. And we would have 3 comments. Firstly, Will has contributed actively throughout this meeting cycle to the work conducted in the sub-working group on Articles 6 and 7 with respect to unpacking key concepts and methodologies. We note that some of the concerns we and other delegations expressed about the value, duration, risk, and low participation in the key concepts exercise are reflected in the working groups on ETI Chair's draft report on CSP7. The facilitator has indicated an intention to proceed to the next stage of the work plan. We will continue to engage as well as monitor the discussions and would also point to the comparative analysis of the responses to the survey that Will prepared in April 2021 as a potential resource for this work. We do remain concerned, however, that so far the amount of states parties contributing actively to the discussions is relatively small, and we hope for more diverse engagement in the next meeting cycle. More broadly, we would also like to urge those state parties to not allow this exercise to become a distraction from other important matters relating to treaty implementation in general and form rigorous applications of Articles 6 and 7 to their exports in particular. Second, preventing diversion is an objective of the ATT, but it is also not the only objective of the ATT, and there are other instruments and fora which address diverted of illicit weapons in more focused ways. Ensuring complementarity with their outputs and procedures is important for achieving the intended impact. Regarding the draft paper found on Annex A, this paper is a contribution to these broader efforts, but would benefit from greater detail and tailoring, such as through adding risk indicators or bringing experience and learning from these other fora. Thirdly, while we work on diversion is welcome, we should become the sole focus of the ATT's community efforts. The other treaty objectives cannot be overlooked. Building on the above points and our most contributions to the ATT work meetings, WILF again calls on ATT states parties to take a more robust, reality-based and compliance-oriented approach to the subject of the treaty implementation. In order for the ATT to have its intended impact and maintain credibility, it's time to forego discussions that occur in a vacuum and to account for actual practice and transfers of concern, of which the daily news cycle and the CSP7 event calendars provide ample evidence. In past statements in another formats, we have suggested various mechanisms that could take this up, ranging from additional sub-working groups to encouraging state parties to raise concerns about specific transfers and their impacts in their conference statements and submissions, as civil society has done for years. The recently adopted peer review mechanisms in the UN Convention Against International Organized Crimes and its forums protocol may serve as another model in order to do so. As we move into another meeting cycle, we wish to reiterate that ATT compliance and implementation is an issue for all and is not conditional. Thank you.
I thank you very much, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We have 3 more speakers on the list. You might have noticed that we have gone beyond 4 p.m., but we have some flexibility here. We can go on for another half an hour. I'll call out the remaining speakers, but the admonishment against not going beyond 2 minutes remains, because in the next 25 minutes or so, we'll be going to item number 7, and there will be 2 reports, one on the financial situation by the Secretariat, and we'll have another report on the Management Committee. Conversations about those reports will have to happen tomorrow. Thank you very much. Now, control arms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Control Arms recognises and appreciates the work done during this difficult year by each of the sub-working groups on implementation. These efforts continue to pave the way towards a strong framework for treaty implementation. Control Arms takes the opportunity to highlight a few concrete examples of the positive impact of ATT implementation, and we hope states will do the same to ensure that the guidance developed by the working groups reflects these important developments. There's a clear need for states parties to share information on how they apply the ATT to individual licensing decisions. The Netherlands, for example, has offered to discuss publicly its own risk assessment process, including the basis for declining certain export licenses. Sharing the steps that states parties take to assess risk provides pathways for others to apply successful strategies and address known challenges. This is what meaningful information sharing looks like. Over several CSP cycles, we urged states to openly discuss problematic arms transfers, most notably in the context of the Yemen war. In early 2021, Italy took the decision to revoke export licenses, which cancelled the shipment of more than 12,700 bombs to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Through this action, as noted by our partner Yemeni civil society organization Muatana, Italy stopped providing bombs to countries conducting indiscriminate and disproportionate airstrikes that kill, wound, and grievously harm civilians, and exacerbating an ever-worsening humanitarian crisis. Control Arms sees value in gaining an understanding of how the ATT is being used in licensing decisions. Conducting a national level survey of the number of licenses granted and refused by states parties consistent with the Article 6 and 7 obligations and their related sub-articles would help inform the guidance developed by this working group. We welcome Canada's statement today, which referenced denials made under the treaty, and we hope other states will follow this positive example. We welcome the paper presented by the sub-working group on Article 11 on diversion risk assessment. Beyond the existing good practice identified in this paper, we urge states to address key weaknesses in legal arms trade systems. Recent events in Afghanistan and before that, the collapse of the Gaddafi regime in Libya illustrate too well the negative impact of the diversion of legally transferred arms in these regions. And yet, countries react too often to crisis by supplying more arms into areas already awash with them. Last week, Amnesty International reported that weapons recently exported legally into West Africa are now in the possession of armed groups in the Sahel, including an Islamic State affiliate that has claimed responsibility for hundreds of civilian deaths. Meanwhile, the EU is developing a new mechanism, the European Peace Facility, which will facilitate the transfer of more military equipment into fragile settings. States should reassess whether the answer to an overabundance of weapons, especially in a fragile context, is more weapons. These situations illustrate the urgent need for risk assessments to take a longer view, including risk of future instability or state collapse and its likely consequences. In this regard, we encourage the working groups on Article 6, 7, and 11 to explore how states parties can incorporate such perspectives into their decision-making processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Control Arms. Matt for Peace, Development and Human Rights, you have the floor.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. تكرر ترحيبها مؤسسة ماعد بعقد المؤتمر السابع إرشادا بمقاصد ومبادئ ميثاق الأمم المتحدة والتأكيد على الحاجة إلى منع الإتجار الغير مشروع بالأسلحة التقليدية والقضاء عليها ومنع تحويلها إلى السوق بطريقة غير مشروعة.
Thank you, Mr. President. Match Foundation for Peace and Development and Human Rights welcomes the convening of the 7th Conference of the State Parties and appreciates the efforts made by the participants to comply with the treaty and take advantage of the opportunity to appreciate in this important discussion the implementation of the convention guided by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, emphasizing the need to prevent illicit trafficking, the project to use conventional weapons and to eradicate them and to prevent the diversion to illicit markets, and yet a number of countries have violated their provisions and carried out arms transfers to areas of armed conflict around the world. The world is witnessing the occurrence of a large number of war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law and violations of international human rights, but it does not hide from anyone the fact that the vast majority of armed transfers to the areas of armed conflict referred to have been undertaken by states that have either signed but not ratified the treaty and have not done this. The practices has not expected from the ground. For the parties to the armed conflict in Yemen, which is considered amongst the first areas of conflict to be affected by the spread of the illicit use of small arms and light weapons in Yemen, the Houthi militia has committed a large number of violations of international humanitarian law since the start of the armed conflict in Yemen 7 years ago until today. Mr. President, the use of horror by Houthis made Yemen the second country in the world that owns weapons after the United States of America, where every 100 civilian owns about 53 weapons and a total of more than 8.14 million weapons in the possession of civilians, which led to the rooting of the culture of violence amongst a large number of the society. Moreover, Iran continued to support the Houthi militia by sending weapons to the Houthi. Therefore, MAAT recommends strict control of the supply of small arms and light weapons, especially in Yemen. It also calls for these weapons not to be used by parties violating international human rights law. The necessity of restricting the circulation of munitions, prohibiting their transfer to areas of armed conflict, and imposing all possible control over arms and ammunition stockpiles in areas of conflict. We also recommend taking strict steps to collect all the remaining weaponry at the end of armed conflicts. And in conclusion, we recommend the inclusion of the youth in the Arab and Middle East areas in order to engage them in the initiatives of ridding ourselves of small and light weapons. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Matt for Peace and Development and Human Rights. Next on our list is Bulgaria. After that, we'll provide a forum to the State of Israel, who have asked for a right of response to the statement made by Palestine. Bulgaria, please.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, since this is the first time my delegation is taking the floor, allow me to congratulate you on the assumption of your duties. We thank you for your skillful stewardship so far and wish you further success. The Republic of Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement made on behalf of the EU member states, but allow me, however, to stress on several considerations in our national capacity. This year's topic, as suggested by you, Mr. President, concerns aspects like in the very heart of our treaty. We welcome your choice and we hope that the goal you have set in your paper, namely to engage all states parties of the ATT, will be reached, thus providing for a truly tangible outcome of our deliberations. We share your view that for the ATT to be efficient, it has to provide for a sustained, integrated and collaborative approach towards addressing the problems of the illicit trade in conventional arms, including South by ensuring accountable and transparent arms control systems and enhancing safe and secure accounting, storage, and disposal of weapons by states. We also share your understanding that strengthening cooperation for the effective implementation of the ATT means preventing diversion in the post-delivery phase, the latter one being one of the major challenges in the course of the practical implementation of the provisions of the ATT. Stockpile security and management are major element in that process. They can play a crucial role in preventing diversion, but only if respective criteria are followed in the same or in the similar way. One possible way forward towards a harmonized approach could be through the introduction of promotion of risk assessment criteria. Another way could be through sharing of national implementation practices in exchange regarding practical implementation measures. In that regard, Mr. President, we understand the topic suggested by you as a very good start of a more thorough and more comprehensive consideration of the whole topic of diversion. Stockpile management represents the end of the delivery chain when elaborating on the overall process of export control of conventional weapons. Harmonized approaches and common understandings with regard to risk criteria could and should play a key role when assessing the potential for diversion. The EU Council Common Position 944 from 8 December 2008 provides for a set of comprehensive criteria applied by EU member states when assessing applications for the export of conventional arms. These criteria constitute a set of very practical benchmarks to be taken into account by national export control authorities when assessing arms exports applications. We are of the view that a discussion regarding the criteria applied by ATT states parties when assessing diversion risks and related threats would significantly enrich our deliberations and provide for new incentives for accessions, but also for new approaches when discussing the genuine causes for diversion. Such a discussion could potentially contribute to an early prevention of exports towards countries of final destination where export control criteria are questionable or vague or do not exist at all, including with regard to safety and security of stockpiles. The above-mentioned discussion can contribute further towards the goal of turning the ATT into the key international instrument for the establishment of highest possible common international standards for regulating the international trade in conventional arms, thus preventing and eradicating the illicit trade in those arms and prevent their diversion. The process will significantly help the ATT to start playing its crucial role in complementing the UN Programme of Action on the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and the International Tracing Instrument, and would contribute more broadly to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Strengthening the role played by the ATT continues to be the subject of enhanced and comprehensive dialogue among states on their day-to-day practices and policies, and the involvement of industry and civil society towards more openness, transparency, and understanding regarding what it takes in real terms in order to prevent diversion. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Bulgaria. The State of Israel, you have the floor, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. I'm compelled to take the floor in reply to a statement which mentioned my country today. Israel regrets the exploitation of this distinguished forum by that speaker for political purposes. Clearly, that speaker might not be familiar or does not care for the dominant professional and non-political nature of this forum and this treaty. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much, the State of Israel. Now we've exhausted the list of speakers. We have a few more minutes, and so, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'd like to thank Ambassador Villegas and Ambassador Liu for their presentation, and I thank all delegates, Excellencies, for the responses that we've gotten. They have been very comprehensive and extremely helpful. Thank you all. Thank you very much. I will now like to move to agenda item number 7. As I said, we've gotten a few very important reports that we listen to and then reflect on, and hopefully have time to discuss later on. Excellencies, agenda number item 7 concerning matters pertaining to the Secretariat, a structure established to assist state parties in the effective implementation of the treaty. Under this item, we have 2 sub-items to consider. 1, the Secretariat's provisional budget for 2022, and 2, the Management Committee's proposal regarding the reappointment of the independent auditor for the ATT. With respect to sub-item 1, which is the Secretariat's provisional budget for 2022, I would like to invite the head of the Secretariat to provide an overview of the Secretariat provisional budget for 2022. Dumisani, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. I'm taking the floor here just to make it a brief introduction of the budget that the Secretariat has prepared and submitted to state parties to this conference for adoption for the financial year 2022. As expected, we normally prepare this budget according to the prescripts of the treaty itself as well as the financial rules, and the budget presented to conference therefore takes into account the elements that are required by the treaty and the financial rules. So in terms of the elements as well as in terms of the budget items. However, the point that I want to bring to the attention of the conference this afternoon is that, as you'll be aware, the ATT budgets are presented in and adopted in US dollars, but they are used or spent in CHF, which is the Swiss currency. And the reason behind that is that the Secretariat is based here in Geneva, and our currency of operation is actually the Swiss francs. Our supply chain as well as procurement processes are actually predicated on the Swiss franc. However, our budget is adopted in US dollars as prescribed by the financial rules. But as a result of this situation, the budget of the Secretariat or of the ATT is exposed to what I will call a fluctuation of the rate of exchange. What it basically means is that for the year ahead, we require much more US dollars to actually procure the same budget items in Swiss francs. You will be aware that the exchange rate between the dollar, US dollar, and the Swiss franc have been consistent over probably about 5 years. But since last year, the dollar has lost value against the Swiss franc. And the current figures are that the Swiss or the dollar has lost about 10% of its value against the Swiss franc. What that basically means, therefore, is that the budget is to actually to take into account the exchange rate that is currently ruling. We have, in this slide, we have tried to reflect to the conference basically the impact of the exchange rate, particularly. If you look at the line that talks about the ATT Secretariat is indicated in red at the top of the table, you realize that over time, from 2017, we have always had efforts to try to bring down the budget of the ATT Secretariat from 911 to 744, 740, 740, and 738. So in the past 4 to 5 years, the budget has been in some kind of a decline. But for the future year, which is 2022, the budget would have to accommodate the 10% depreciation of the US dollar against the franc. And that is why the budget, therefore, for the future year is going up by about 10%, which is coming to about 812,000. And that is a function, direct function of the exchange rate. Of course, there are other items that have changed a bit, but in the main, the main cause of the budget increase by that percentage is exchange rate. In the next slide, we presented that whilst we were faced with the question of dealing with the new exchange rate, we had to look at the method of applying it on the budget. There were two options that we had. One was to apply 10% across the board, but the other option was to basically apply the 10% not across the board, but actually against certain items and moderate others. And what I basically mean is that for items that are based on contracts that are currently standing, we had to apply the 10%. But on items that are estimate-based, we had therefore to try to moderate those costs to accommodate, to try to minimize the impact of this rate of exchange. The budget as such was presented to committee, the management committee, which exercises oversight over these matters. And the committee itself had to look at two positions. One was to go for a full cost budget or was to go for a reduced budget. And if you were to go for a reduced budget, there are certain risks that are supposed to be escalated to this conference to be considered and accepted by the conference. In this context, therefore, what we decided as a secretariat was to actually present to conference a budget that is realistic, that will be able to support the ATT process and programs, and is going to be able to ensure that our work is not impacted negatively. But a point to underscore here is that the economic situation, if it improves, if the US dollar improves in terms of value against the Swiss franc, if there are savings deriving from that, so those savings will be turned back to states in a format through a rollover process, as you would know. 8.4 of the financial rules provide for a mechanism of rolling money back to states, which has not been used. So that mechanism is going to deal with changes in the real world in financial year 2022. And we also note that we want to highlight that I think the budget at the present moment, given the increase in the number of state parties, the base on which the budget is shared has increased a little bit. And I think that is to the benefit of ensuring that the burden is shared by more states than a less number of states. However, as a final point to make here is that if the conference would be unable to adopt the budget as proposed, we are also indicating areas of the budget that could be considered for reduction. And of course, when we consider those reductions, and I think, of course, then the conference will have to accept the risks that we are escalating to the conference. So in a nutshell, I would want then to submit, Mr. President, that the budget is realistic and we call for the adoption of this budget in a format that it has been presented. I noted that Mr. President has just excused himself, but in his absence, in my role as the head of the Secretariat and as the Secretary of Conference, I will therefore step into his shoes for a moment, not to call for something that he wouldn't have called for, but to actually go to the next item under this sub-item, which is actually a proposal by the Management Committee for a reappointment of an independent auditor for the ATT process. To do that, I hand over to the member of the AMC, Mr. Anga September, who represents the AMC over here. Mr. September.
Thank you, Mr. Gladler. Mr. President in absentia, Excellencies, distinguished representatives. As you know, the Management Committee is established as a subsidiary body to provide oversight on financial matters as well as other matters related to the ATT Secretariat with the aim of ensuring maximum accountability, efficiency and transparency, in short, to ensure good governance. It is therefore a pleasure to, on behalf of the Management Committee, to present the committee's proposal regarding the reappointment of an independent auditor for the ATT. Rule 10 of the ATT Financial Rules provides that the Conference of State Parties shall appoint, for a period of 4 years, an internationally recognized independent auditor with experience in the audit of international organizations to audit the ATT Secretariat, the activities of CSP and subsidiary bodies, The independent auditor shall be appointed for a period of 5 years and may be reappointed for one additional term, subject to satisfactory performance. In September 2017, CSP3 decided to appoint PricewaterhouseCoopers as the independent auditor for the ATT for a period of 4 years, covering the period 2018 to 2021, in accordance with Rule 10 of the ATT financial rules. The first term of PricewaterhouseCoopers as the auditor for the ATT terminates at the end of December 2021. In view of this conference is expected to decide on the reappointment of the ATT auditor for the next period. After consideration of the good work conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers in the past 4 years in respect of auditing of ATT financial statements and providing the necessary assurance, the committee proposes that PricewaterhouseCoopers be reappointed as an independent auditor for the ATT for an additional period of 4 years starting in January 2022. The cost for servicing the PricewaterhouseCoopers contract are included in the 2022 budget estimates for the ATT Secretariat and will be provided for in all future ATT Secretariat budgets. With that, I thank you, distinguished delegates, for your kind attention, and I yield the floor back to the President.
Thank you very much. Let me thank both of you, Secretariat, Head of the Secretariat, and the Management Committee for your reports. Thank you so very much. And as I said, we don't have time to go into an extended discussion of what was presented. We will be able to do so tomorrow. We are way beyond our time allocation, and I'm sure we are all very exhausted for the day. Before I bring this meeting to a close, I'll yield the floor once again to the Secretariat to make a couple announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just summarize the announcement for this afternoon or for this afternoon. There are 3 site events that will be taking place, or some of them might have started already. The first one is a site event hosted by the State of Palestine. It goes under the title Upholding Legal Obligations under the ATT, the Case of the Palestinian People. That is site event number 1. Site event number 2 is hosted by Safer World with the title See You in Court, Yemen-linked arms export litigation and its implications. The third one is hosted by UNIDER, Stimson Center, and the Conflict Armament Research. It goes under the title Analyzing Diversion Dynamics, Lessons Learned. So delegates are invited to join this conference, and the links to these site events are set out on the ATT website or published over there. But tomorrow morning, we have another site event taking place before the start of the 3rd session of conference. It will start at 11:30 to 12:40. It's a site event that is hosted by the European Union. It goes under the title Taking Stock of the EU ATT Outreach Program. And again, the links of this site event are on the website. The final point, Mr. Chair, or Mr. President, is that we encourage delegates to submit statements to us so that the Secretariat, so that we can be able to publish them on the website. So that will facilitate the accessibility to the statements that have been made over here. Mr. President, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I will now move on to adjourn this meeting for today. We will resume our work tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. with the consideration of agenda item 8, and we'll have a conversation, if that's possible, on what we've had. Tomorrow, the focus will be begin with transparency and reporting. I thank you all for attending this meeting. I've been approached by a number of people about the the list of speakers who didn't have the chance to speak yesterday. We will get to that, I promise. It is just that time hasn't allowed us to do that today. But we will get to that before the conference ends. Thank you all, and I wish you a joyful ride home, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.